Surviving the zombie apocalypse, the frozen trail. After months of surviving alone in the hidden bunker beneath his childhood home, Elias Hart finally leaves its safety behind. Guided by a mysterious emergency signal, cryptic family symbols, and the hope that his missing older brother is still alive, he begins a dangerous journey across a frozen, zombie-infested city. The road north is harsher than he imagined. Blizzards, collapsing buildings, starving zombie hordes, and ruthless survivor groups make every step a battle for survival. Along the way, Elias discovers that his family's secret communication system reaches farther than he ever believed, hinting that his parents and grandparents were connected to other hidden shelters scattered across the country. As he follows the signal deeper into the snow-covered wasteland, Elias slowly transforms from a lone scavenger into a true survivor. But every clue brings another question. Is his brother waiting for him? Or has someone else been leading him into a trap? Chapter 1. The First Steps. The bunker was quiet, not the peaceful kind of quiet Elias had grown accustomed to. This silence felt different, final. He stood in the center of the common room with his backpack at his feet, checking the same list for the third time. Food, water, medical supplies, warm clothes, sleeping bag, flashlight, extra batteries, compass, map, radio, crowbar, knife, fire starter. Everything was there. His journey northwest was finally beginning. Elias walked through the bunker one last time. The generator was running normally. The water system was stable. The greenhouse lights glowed softly over the rows of vegetables. The plants had grown considerably since he first planted them. He touched one of the tomato leaves gently. "I'll be back." He checked the emergency food storage again. Then the radio. Then the archive. Finally, he stopped in front of the family photographs. His parents. His older brother. Himself. For years, he had believed those memories were all he had left. Now he had something else. A direction. Northwest. A signal. And a possibility. His brother might still be alive. Before leaving, Elias opened his journal. He wrote, Day 133. Leaving the bunker today. Destination, Northwest. Objective, follow the signal. If possible, find my brother. Return to the bunker. He paused, then added, no matter what happens, this place remains home. He closed the journal. Emergency exit A opened with a heavy metallic groan. Cold air rushed down the tunnel. Elias pulled his hood over his head. For several seconds, he simply stood there. The last time he had entered this tunnel, he had been running from the world. This time, he was walking toward it. He climbed the ladder. Snow covered the hidden entrance. He carefully replaced the camouflage after stepping outside. Then he turned toward the road. The city stretched before him. His first destination wasn't far. An abandoned bus depot several kilometers northwest. He had chosen it because it offered several advantages. Shelter, a roof, potential supplies, multiple escape routes. Most importantly, it wasn't on the main highway. Station 7 had warned survivors to avoid highways. Elias intended to listen. The first few hours were uneventful. The snow made walking difficult. Every step sank several centimeters. His backpack felt heavier than it had inside the bunker. But Elias kept a steady pace. He avoided open streets whenever possible. He moved between houses, through alleys, across backyards. Whenever he encountered a zombie, he simply changed direction. There was no reason to fight. Not yet. By afternoon, he reached the bus depot. The building had been partially destroyed. Several buses were scattered across the parking lot. Some had burned. Others were buried beneath snow. Elias didn't enter immediately. He watched. 5 minutes. 10. No movement. He checked the roof. No silhouettes. No birds suddenly taking flight. No obvious signs of recent activity. Only then did he approach. The depot office had been looted. The ticket machines were smashed. The shelves were empty. But Elias discovered something useful. A maintenance room. Inside were tools, blankets, emergency road flares, and several old maps. He took only what he needed. The road flares were especially valuable. He placed 2 into his backpack. As evening approached, Elias searched for somewhere to sleep. The depot itself was too exposed. The buses offered better protection. He inspected several. Most had broken windows. One had a damaged roof. Another smelled strongly of decay. Then he found one near the far end of the depot. An old city bus. Its windows were mostly intact. The emergency exit worked. The seats were still attached. More importantly, it could be locked from inside. This will do. Elias cleared the bus carefully. No zombies. No bodies. Only old newspapers and scattered belongings. He selected a seat near the back. He placed his backpack against the emergency exit. If anything entered through the front door, he would have a second escape route. Then he covered the broken side window with a blanket. The temperature inside immediately improved. Before eating dinner, Elias checked the radio. Static. He adjusted the frequency. Nothing. He waited. Still nothing. Then, a faint beep. Beep. His eyes immediately went to the receiver. Northwest. The signal was weak, but it was there. He marked the time. 7:42 p.m. Still following me. Outside, darkness settled over the city. Elias ate a small portion of dried food and drank only enough water to stay comfortable. He wanted to conserve everything. The journey had only just begun. He couldn't afford to waste supplies during the first night. After eating, he opened his journal. First day on the road. Distance traveled, moderate. Food used, small portion. Water used, minimal. Supplies gained, maps, blankets, flares. Shelter, abandoned city bus. Signal, detected. Threats, none encountered directly. He stared at the last line. None encountered directly. That didn't mean there were none. The city was simply quiet. Too quiet. A faint sound came from outside. Elias immediately stopped writing. Scrape. Silence. Then, scrape. Something was moving across the snow. He slowly reached for his flashlight. He didn't turn it on. Instead, he looked through the gap between the curtains. A zombie wandered past the bus. Then another. Then another. 3. They moved slowly through the snow. Elias remained completely still. No unnecessary movement. No noise. No light. The zombies eventually disappeared into the darkness. He waited another 10 minutes before relaxing. That night, Elias slept sitting against the bus window with his backpack beside him. The cold still reached his fingers. The seat was uncomfortable. The air smelled like old fabric. It wasn't home. It wasn't the bunker. But it was safe enough. And for tonight, that was enough. Before closing his eyes, Elias looked toward the northwest. He couldn't see the destination. Couldn't see his brother. Couldn't see what waited beyond the frozen streets. Only darkness. But somewhere out there, a signal was still calling. Elias pulled his blanket tighter. One step at a time. Then he closed his eyes. Tomorrow, he would take the next one. Chapter 2, White Silence. Elias woke before sunrise. For several seconds, he didn't remember where he was. Then the cold reached his fingers. The hard bus seat pressed against his back. The smell of old fabric filled his nose. He slowly opened his eyes. The abandoned bus. The depot. The journey. He was on the road now. Not in the bunker. Elias checked his watch. 5:48 a.m. Outside, the sky was still dark. He carefully lifted the curtain. Snow was falling. Not lightly. Heavier than yesterday. Large flakes drifted across the depot, slowly covering the abandoned buses and the footprints he had left behind. He frowned. That's going to make things difficult. He ate a small breakfast. Dried fruit. A little bread. Warm water from his thermos. Nothing more. His supplies needed to last. After eating, he checked the radio. Static. He adjusted the frequency. Nothing. The signal from last night was gone. Elias wasn't worried. Signals could disappear. Weather could interfere. He packed the radio away. Before leaving the bus, Elias inspected the depot one more time. The snow had covered everything. That was useful. It would hide his tracks. But it would also hide other things. Including danger. He stepped outside. The cold immediately bit through his gloves. He pulled his hood tighter. Then started walking northwest. For the next hour, Elias followed an old service road. The snowfall grew heavier. Visibility dropped. The city in front of him slowly disappeared behind a wall of white. Buildings became shadows. Street signs became barely visible shapes. Even nearby cars vanished beneath the snow. The world became completely white. Silent. Empty. Elias stopped. He checked his compass. Northwest. Still correct. He continued. One step. Another. Another. His boots sank deeper with every movement. The backpack felt heavier. The cold wind pushed against him. He kept walking. Then he saw something. A building, barely visible through the snow. A church. The front doors were partially open. Elias approached carefully. He checked the windows first. No movement. No broken glass from inside. No signs of recent struggle. He entered. The church was freezing. Most of the windows were broken. Snow had blown across the floor. The wooden pews were covered in dust. But there was something unusual. A small fire pit had been built near the altar. The ashes were dark, not old. Elias crouched beside them. He touched the edge carefully. Still slightly warm. Someone had been here recently. Very recently. He immediately checked the rest of the church. Behind the altar. The storage room. The basement. The choir room. Nothing. No survivor. No zombie. Only signs that someone had stayed here. A blanket. An empty food wrapper. A metal cup. A few footprints disappearing toward the back entrance. Elias stared at them. Someone's ahead of me. He found a small room beneath the church. It had probably once been used for storage. The walls were thick. The door closed properly. It was warmer than the main hall. Good enough for shelter. Elias decided to stay. The storm was becoming too dangerous. Traveling in whiteout conditions wasn't worth the risk. He cleared a small space. Rolled out his sleeping bag. Set his backpack beside him. Then checked the emergency supplies. Everything remained dry. That mattered. Wet clothes in this weather could become deadly. He changed into a dry inner layer and hung the damp clothing near the small heater he carried. Hours passed. The storm didn't stop. The world outside disappeared completely. Elias couldn't see more than a few meters from the church. He understood now why his father had warned him about winter travel. The cold wasn't the greatest danger. The inability to see, that was worse. Around noon, Elias explored the church again. He noticed something carved into one of the wooden pews. A tree. The Hart family symbol. His heart stopped. He leaned closer. The carving was old. Very old. It wasn't his brother's recent mark. But beneath it, someone had carved a small arrow. Northwest. Elias touched the symbol. You came through here. He couldn't know who had carved it. His family had lived in this region for generations. Perhaps his grandfather had passed through. Perhaps his brother had discovered it. Either way, the direction remained the same. Northwest. The storm continued into the afternoon. Elias made a simple meal. Then spent several hours reviewing his route. The original road was no longer safe. Snow would likely bury it. He would need another path. He found an old map in the church storage room. A narrow trail connected the church to a residential district farther northwest. It wasn't marked as a main road. Perfect. Less traffic. Less chance of encountering large groups of zombies. As evening arrived, Elias heard something outside. Crunch. He froze. Another step. Crunch. Someone was walking through the snow. He reached for his crowbar. The footsteps stopped. Silence. Elias waited. Nothing. He slowly approached a broken window. Through the thick snowfall, he saw a shadow. A person. Standing outside the church. Completely still. Elias's hand tightened around the crowbar. The figure remained there for several seconds. Then turned. And disappeared into the storm. Elias didn't move. He waited another 20 minutes. Nothing returned. He didn't chase. He didn't call out. The stranger had clearly known the church was occupied. Yet they hadn't entered. That meant one of two things. They weren't looking for trouble. Or, they were waiting for something. That night, Elias locked the storage room door and pushed a heavy cabinet against it. He kept his boots on. His backpack within reach. Crowbar beside him. The storm continued outside. The church disappeared beneath the white silence. Elias opened his journal. Day 134. Whiteout storm. Unable to travel safely. Found evidence that someone recently used the church. Hart family symbol found on old pew. Saw an unknown survivor outside. They did not approach. He paused. Then added, I'm not alone on this road. Elias closed the journal. Outside, the snow continued falling, covering footprints, covering roads, covering everything. By morning, the world would look completely different. And Elias would have to find his way through it. Chapter 3, Frozen Highway. The storm finally stopped before sunrise. Elias woke to an unfamiliar silence. No wind, no falling snow, no movement outside, only the faint crackling of the small heater beside him. He sat up slowly. For a moment, he almost felt safe. Then he remembered the figure he'd seen outside the church. His hand immediately went to the crowbar beside his sleeping bag. Nothing had happened during the night. The door was still locked. His supplies were untouched. Whoever had been outside hadn't returned. Elias packed his belongings and stepped into the church hall. Snow had blown through the broken windows overnight. The wooden floor was covered in white. He walked toward the altar and stopped. The old fire pit was completely cold now. Beside it, he found something he hadn't noticed yesterday. A small metal cup. Inside the cup was a folded piece of paper. Elias opened it. Only 3 words were written. Don't use highways. He stared at the message. The handwriting wasn't his brother's. But it matched the warning from Station 7. Elias folded the paper and placed it inside his journal. Another warning. Another reason to stay off the main roads. He checked his map. The residential route he'd planned was still possible. But the snowstorm had changed everything. Several side streets were completely buried. A safer-looking path would take him farther west before turning northwest. That meant more walking, more time, more food. Still, it was better than taking the highway. Elias packed his compass away. Slow is better than dead. By mid-morning, he reached the edge of the highway. The sight stopped him. The entire road was frozen beneath thick layers of snow. Cars and trucks stood abandoned in every lane. Some had crashed into barriers. Others had simply stopped. Several were buried almost to their roofs. The highway looked like a graveyard. And there were far too many bodies. Elias stayed behind a concrete barrier. He raised his binoculars. At first, nothing moved. Then he saw them. Zombies. Hundreds. Some stood between vehicles. Others wandered along the highway. A few were trapped inside cars, endlessly pushing against frozen windows. The highway wasn't empty. It was packed. A single loud noise could bring the entire group toward him. Elias lowered the binoculars. Definitely not using that. He followed the edge of the highway instead. It was slower, but the snow provided cover. He moved between abandoned buildings and piles of snow-covered debris. Every few minutes, he stopped to listen. Nothing. The frozen highway remained strangely quiet. Then, a horn sounded. Honk. Elias froze. One of the abandoned vehicles had somehow activated its alarm. The sound echoed across the highway. The response was immediate. Hundreds of heads turned. Zombies began moving. Slowly at first, then faster. More and more emerged from between the vehicles. Elias backed away. Too many. He turned and ran. The horde poured toward the sound. Elias moved away from the highway as quickly as possible. Snow reached his knees. His backpack bounced against his shoulders. He didn't look back. He didn't need to. The groans behind him were enough. A metal fence blocked his path. Elias climbed. His boot slipped. He nearly fell. He caught himself and pulled his body over the top. Then he heard a loud crack. The fence collapsed behind him. The zombies reached it seconds later. They pressed against the broken metal. Some crawled through. Others became tangled. The barrier wouldn't hold forever. Elias ran again. He spotted an abandoned maintenance building. The door was half open. He slipped inside and closed it quietly. Then he crouched behind a stack of equipment. Outside, the zombies passed. Dozens. Then hundreds. Their footsteps sounded like heavy rain against the snow. Elias covered his mouth. He didn't breathe normally until the noise began fading. After nearly an hour, silence returned. He carefully looked outside. The highway was empty again. The horde had followed the alarm farther south. Elias remained still. His hands were shaking, not from the cold, from realizing how close he had come. The maintenance building contained several useful items. A road flare, 2 blankets, a small toolbox, a half-empty bottle of engine coolant. Nothing he needed badly enough to carry far. He took the blankets and flare. Then noticed something scratched into the wall. A tree. The Hart family symbol. Elias stared. No. He stepped closer. Beneath the tree was a simple arrow. Northwest. Exactly the direction he was traveling. Someone from his family had used this building before. Or someone who knew the family code had been here. He searched the room more carefully. Under an old desk, he found another message. This time, only a single sentence. The highway isn't the road. It's the warning. Elias read it twice. Perhaps his family had known how dangerous the highways would become. Perhaps his brother had left the message. He didn't know. but he copied it into his journal. By late afternoon, Elias left the maintenance building. He didn't return to the highway. Instead, he followed a narrow service trail through the trees. It was slower. The snow was deeper, but there were fewer signs of zombies. For the next several hours, he walked alone. No radio signal, no human voices, no strange figures, only the sound of his boots pressing into the snow. As the sun began to disappear, Elias found an abandoned roadside shelter. 3 walls, a roof, enough space for one person. He cleared the snow and prepared a small resting area. Before eating, he checked the radio. Static. Then, beep. Elias looked up. The signal had returned. Weak, but unmistakable. Northwest. He smiled. Still there. He opened his journal. Day 135. The highway is completely overrun. Avoided the main road. Encountered a large zombie group after a car alarm activated. Found another heart symbol. Someone left another warning. The signal returned tonight. He paused. Then wrote. The road is getting harder. But the direction hasn't changed. Elias closed the journal. Outside, the frozen highway stretched through the darkness behind him. He had avoided it. For now. Ahead, the trail disappeared into the trees. Elias pulled his blanket tighter and looked toward the northwest. Tomorrow, he would keep moving. Chapter 4. The signal returns. Elias woke before sunrise. The roadside shelter was colder than the church. His sleeping bag had kept most of the warmth in, but frost covered the edges of his backpack and the inside of the shelter walls. He rubbed his hands together and checked his supplies. Nothing missing. Nothing damaged. Good. He packed quickly. Today, he needed to cover more ground. Before leaving, Elias checked the radio. Static. He turned the dial slowly. Nothing. He waited. Still nothing. For a moment, disappointment settled in his chest. Then, beep. Elias stopped. Another beep followed. Beep, beep. He grabbed the receiver. The signal was stronger than yesterday. Much stronger. He checked his directional indicator. Northwest. He smiled. There you are. Elias took out his map. The previous signals had appeared roughly along the same route. But today's signal was different. It wasn't just stronger. It was lasting longer. Instead of disappearing after a few seconds, the signal continued. 5 seconds. 10. 15. Then, static. Gone. Elias stared at the receiver. That wasn't an accident. Someone was transmitting. He waited. 10 minutes. Nothing. 20. Then the signal returned. This time, there was something underneath the beeping. A faint voice. Anyone. Elias's eyes widened. The voice disappeared. He adjusted the frequency. Static. Then, northwest. Gone again. He wrote everything down. Signal log. Day 136. Signal strength. Increasing. Direction. Northwest. Voice detected. Yes. Words heard. Anyone. Northwest. Elias underlined the last word. Someone was intentionally broadcasting. He continued northwest. The terrain became more difficult. The road gradually disappeared beneath the snow. He followed utility poles instead. They formed a rough line toward the industrial district. Every so often, Elias checked the signal. It remained strongest in the same direction. Around noon, he reached a small convenience store. The windows were broken. The sign hung crookedly. Snow had entered through the front entrance. Elias almost walked past. Then he noticed something. A footprint. Fresh. One set. Heading inside. He crouched. The edges were still sharp. Someone had been there recently. Elias didn't enter immediately. He watched the building from across the street. 5 minutes. Nothing. 10. Still nothing. He checked the roof. No movement. Finally, he approached. The door was already open. Inside, the store had been stripped almost completely. Shelves were empty. Freezers were dead. The floor was covered in broken glass. But behind the counter, Elias found a small emergency radio battery. He tested it. Still usable. Nice. He added it to his supplies. Then he noticed the wall behind the counter. Someone had written something there. Not graffiti. A message. Signal heard here. Below it was an arrow. Northwest. Elias stared at it. The same direction. Again. He took a photograph with his old camera. Then copied the message into his journal. A sound came from the back of the store. Clink. Elias froze. He reached for the crowbar. Another sound. Clink. Something was moving. He slowly approached the stockroom. The door was half open. He pushed it gently. A small metal can rolled across the floor. Then a rat disappeared beneath a shelf. Elias exhaled. "You're going to give me a heart attack." He lowered the crowbar. Behind the stockroom, he discovered a maintenance hallway. It connected to the building next door. That gave him another possible route. He checked the map. The alley behind the stores led directly toward an old railway line. The railway ran northwest. Perfect. Less open than the roads. By late afternoon, Elias reached the railway. Snow covered the tracks. Old freight cars sat motionless along the line. He walked beside them, using the massive cars as protection from the wind. The signal continued. Beep. Stronger. Beep. Then, a voice. Clearer this time. "If you can hear this." Elias stopped walking. He pulled the receiver closer. "Follow the rail." Static. "Don't stop." More static. Station 7. The transmission ended. Elias stood completely still. He replayed the recording. The words were unmistakable. "Follow the rail." He looked down the tracks. The railway disappeared into the snowy distance. For the first time, Elias felt certain that his journey wasn't simply following a random signal. Someone knew the route. Someone was giving directions. And Station 7 knew enough about the region to guide survivors through it. As evening approached, Elias found an abandoned railway maintenance cabin. The door was locked. He forced it open with his crowbar. Inside was a small room. A desk. A broken radio. A wood stove. Several shelves. And a map. Elias unfolded it. The railway had been marked with several red circles. One was near the church. Another near the bus depot. Another near the industrial district. And farther northwest, a large circle surrounded an old factory. Beside it was written, "Beacon." Elias stared at the word. The signal. It was coming from there. He checked the map again. The factory was still several days away. But now he knew exactly where he was going. He carefully folded the map and placed it inside his journal. Then he started the wood stove. For the first time in days, he felt something close to confidence. Not safety. Not certainty. Just direction. That night, the radio came alive again. Beep. Beep. Then the voice. Station 7. Elias listened carefully. To anyone following the railway. Static. The next shelter is. The transmission broke apart. Elias waited. Nothing. Then one final sentence came through. "Don't trust the lights." The radio went silent. Elias slowly lowered it. He looked toward the dark window. Far beyond the cabin, something glowed faintly through the snow. A distant light. Perhaps a building. Perhaps a fire. Perhaps something else. He didn't know. But he remembered the warning. Don't trust the lights. Elias closed the curtains. Then opened his journal. Day 136. The signal returned. Voice confirmed. Station 7 directed me toward the railway. Found a map pointing toward an old factory. Possible source of the signal. Warning received. Don't trust the lights. He paused. Then added. I'm getting closer. Outside. The distant light remained visible through the falling snow. Elias didn't approach it. Not tonight. He had survived this long by learning one simple lesson. When the world gives you a warning, listen. Chapter 5. The Empty Camp. The railway stretched endlessly into the snow. Elias walked beside the tracks, keeping his eyes on the distant factory marked on the old map. The signal had gone quiet again. But he knew the direction now. Northwest. He followed the tracks for most of the morning. The snow was deep, but the railway embankment was easier to walk than the surrounding fields. Every few hundred meters, he stopped to listen. Nothing. No zombies. No voices. Only the wind. Around noon, Elias noticed something unusual. Smoke. Very faint. Not rising into the sky. Instead, it drifted low between the trees. He immediately stepped off the tracks. Someone had a fire nearby. That meant someone was nearby. Elias crouched behind a snow-covered concrete barrier and watched. Nothing moved. He waited. 5 minutes. 10. The smoke continued. Campfire. He checked his surroundings. There were no obvious footprints around the tracks. Whoever had made the fire had approached from another direction. Elias considered leaving. Then he noticed something beside a tree. A strip of blue fabric tied around a branch. A marker. He remembered the warnings. Trust actions before words. He slowly approached. The camp was hidden inside a small group of pine trees. At first glance, it looked abandoned. A small tent had collapsed beneath the snow. A metal cooking pot sat beside a dead fire. 2 wooden crates were partially buried. A sleeping bag lay folded against a tree. There was no person, no body, no blood, just silence. Elias kept his crowbar in hand. He searched the perimeter first. No footprints leading away, no zombies, no obvious traps, only one set of footprints. They ended at the edge of the camp and disappeared. Elias frowned. Where did you go? He approached the fire. The ashes were cold, but not old. The wood underneath was still dark from recent burning. Someone had been here within the last day or two. He carefully checked the cooking pot. Inside was a thin layer of frozen soup. He didn't touch it. The food might be contaminated. Instead, he searched the crates. The first contained empty bottles. The second contained canned beans. 4 cans, still sealed. Elias smiled. Thank you. He checked the expiration dates. Old, but safe enough. He added them to his backpack. Under the collapsed tent, he found more supplies. A wool blanket, 2 candles, a small first aid kit, a nearly full propane canister, and a hand-drawn map. Elias unfolded it. The railway was drawn in black. Several locations were marked with circles. The church, the bus depot, the railway cabin, and farther northwest, the same factory. But someone had added another location. A small mountain symbol. Beside it were 2 words. Safe house. Elias studied the map carefully. The handwriting looked different from the messages he'd found before. Still, the route was clear. Then he found something else. A wooden symbol. A tree. The Hart family tree. Elias's breathing stopped. It had been carved into the side of the camp's supply box. He touched it. This one was fresh. The edges were still sharp. Someone had carved it recently. Very recently. His brother knew this symbol. If his brother had passed through this camp, then Elias was closer than he had thought. He searched the camp again. This time, he looked for anything personal. Inside the tent was a small notebook. Most pages had been torn out. Only 3 remained. The first page contained a list. Food, water, medicine, fuel. The second page had a simple sentence. The city is no longer safe. The third made Elias's heart pound. If someone follows the railway, tell them to keep going northwest. There was no signature, no name, but Elias knew the message mattered. He carefully placed the notebook into his own journal. A sound came from the trees. Crack. Elias immediately crouched. He turned toward the noise. Nothing. Then another sound. Crunch. Footsteps. He grabbed his crowbar. Someone was approaching. Slowly. Elias moved behind a tree and waited. A figure appeared between the snow-covered pines. Tall. Wearing a dark coat. Carrying a backpack. The same kind of weatherproof clothing as the stranger he had seen near the church. Elias held his breath. The figure stopped beside the camp. Looked around. Then walked directly toward the supply box. They touched the heart symbol. For several seconds, they simply stood there. Then they looked toward the railway. Toward northwest. Elias couldn't see their face. The snow was too heavy. He considered calling out, "Hey!" The word almost left his mouth. But he remembered the warning. Never reveal your location. He stayed silent. The stranger suddenly turned. For one terrifying moment, Elias thought they had seen him. But the figure simply walked away. Deeper into the forest. Elias waited. 5 minutes. 10. Then carefully emerged. He looked at the footprints. Only one set. The same direction. Northwest. Elias packed the remaining useful supplies. He left the camp mostly untouched. Before leaving, he did something unexpected. He added 3 cans of his own food to the supply box. Then placed a note beside them. For whoever comes next. He didn't sign it. He didn't know who might find it. Maybe the person he'd just seen. Maybe another survivor. Maybe his brother. He closed the box. The afternoon sky darkened. Elias returned to the railway. The distant factory was barely visible through the snow. His radio remained silent, but his thoughts were louder than ever. Someone had been following this route. Someone had known about the family symbols. Someone had been leaving messages. And someone had just walked away from this camp. He opened his journal. Day 137. Found an abandoned survivor camp. Supplies recovered. Canned beans. Blanket. Candles. First aid supplies. Propane. Map. Found another heart symbol. Someone recently used the camp. Saw the same kind of hooded stranger again. They left toward the northwest. Elias stopped writing, then added, I'm not following a random signal anymore. I'm following a trail. He closed the journal. The wind swept across the railway. Elias adjusted his backpack, then continued walking. Northwest. Chapter 6, The Bridge Crossing. The railway disappeared beneath the trees. Elias kept walking. The abandoned camp was already far behind him. The stranger was gone. The supplies were packed securely inside his backpack. And the signal still pointed northwest. For the first few hours, the journey was uneventful. Snow covered the railway tracks, but the path remained easy enough to follow. Then the trees suddenly opened. Elias stopped. Ahead was a river, and crossing it was a bridge. He took out the map. The railway crossed the river at exactly this point. There was another route farther south, but it would add nearly a full day to his journey. The bridge looked old, very old. Several sections were covered in snow. Some railings were missing. One side had partially collapsed. Elias studied it through his binoculars. No obvious movement, no zombies, no people. He lowered the binoculars. Still, something about the bridge bothered him. He approached slowly. The tracks continued across the center. A few abandoned maintenance vehicles sat near the entrance. One had fallen onto its side. Another was completely buried. Elias stepped onto the bridge. The metal beneath his boots groaned. He immediately stopped. He tested the next section. Solid. Another. Solid. He continued. Halfway across, he heard something beneath him. Thump. Elias froze. Another sound. Scrape. He slowly looked through the gaps between the railway ties. Below the bridge, something moved beneath the ice. He couldn't see clearly. Then, a hand slammed against the frozen surface. Elias jumped backward. Another hand appeared. Then another. Zombies. They hadn't been walking. They had fallen into the river months ago. The cold had trapped them beneath the ice. Frozen. Waiting. Elias backed away. The zombies couldn't reach him. Not yet. He turned around. The bridge behind him was still clear. He could return. Then a loud crack echoed beneath his feet. Crack. Elias looked down. A section of ice below the bridge shattered. Several zombies broke through. Their hands grabbed the metal support beams. One began climbing. Elias's heart raced. He ran. The first zombie pulled itself onto the railway. Elias swung his crowbar. Thud. It fell backward. Another zombie climbed up. He struck it again. Then another. The cold water had made them slow. But there were too many. Elias couldn't stay. He ran toward the opposite side. Behind him, more zombies crawled onto the bridge. Their groans echoed through the steel structure. Elias reached the damaged section. The tracks ahead had collapsed. A gap several meters wide separated him from the other side. He stopped. No, there was no way around. The river below was frozen. But the ice was breaking. He couldn't jump. The zombies were getting closer. Elias looked around desperately. Then noticed the maintenance vehicle lying on its side. A metal support beam extended from its rear. He had an idea. He grabbed a length of thick cable from the vehicle. He hooked it around the damaged railing. Then tied the other end around his backpack. It wasn't perfect. It wasn't safe. But it might work. The zombies reached him. Elias swung the crowbar. One fell. Another grabbed his coat. He kicked it away. Then, he ran. He jumped across the gap. His boots hit the opposite side. For a moment, he slipped. His hands grabbed the edge. His backpack pulled him downward. Elias gritted his teeth. Come on. He pulled himself up. The cable caught against the railing behind him. His backpack stopped him from falling. He rolled onto the snow. Breathing hard. Alive. But the zombies weren't finished. Several had reached the broken section. One stepped onto the unstable rail. The metal gave way. The zombie fell into the river. Then another. The remaining zombies crowded together. Their weight weakened the damaged section further. The bridge groaned. Elias grabbed his backpack. He ran. Behind him, a huge section of the bridge collapsed. Steel screamed. Snow exploded into the air. Several zombies disappeared beneath the broken railway. The remaining ones were stranded on the other side. Elias didn't stop. He kept running until the sounds faded. Eventually, he reached the forest. He leaned against a tree. His hands shook. His breathing was heavy. He looked back toward the bridge. From this distance, it looked almost peaceful. Snow falling softly. Trees standing still. Nothing moving. He sat down. For several minutes, he simply breathed. Then he checked his backpack. One food packet had been crushed. One flashlight was damaged. His water bottle was still intact. The radio still worked. Elias switched it on. Static. He waited. Nothing. Then, beep. Northwest. He laughed quietly. You're still there. He opened his journal. Day 138. Reached the river. Bridge was unstable. Zombies were trapped beneath the ice. Bridge partially collapsed while crossing. Lost one flashlight. Food supplies remain sufficient. Radio signal still active. He added another line. Never trust frozen water. Then another. Never assume something is dead just because it can't move. Elias closed the journal. That evening, he made camp beneath a group of pine trees. He didn't light a large fire. Only a tiny controlled flame. Enough to warm his hands. He ate a small meal. Then checked the map. The factory was getting closer. But the terrain ahead looked increasingly difficult. Beyond the forest, the land rose toward the industrial district. He would need to climb. And the weather was getting colder. Elias looked toward the railway. The tracks continued northwest beyond the ruined bridge. The signal was still waiting. His brother's trail might be waiting too. He tightened the straps of his backpack. Tomorrow, he would keep moving. One bridge behind him, another unknown road ahead. Chapter 7, Winter Hunting. The forest was quieter than the highway. Elias preferred it that way. After crossing the ruined bridge, he had spent the night beneath a cluster of pine trees. The small fire beside him had burned down before dawn, leaving only a thin layer of warm ash. He woke early. His first thought was food. He checked his backpack. Canned beans, dried fruit, a few pieces of bread. Enough for several days. But the journey ahead could take longer than expected. He couldn't keep depending entirely on what he had brought from the bunker. He needed to learn how to find food on the road. Elias remembered something from his grandfather's survival journals. Winter makes food harder to find, but it also makes tracks easier to read. He had ignored the sentence when he first read it. Now it made sense. Fresh snow covered the forest floor. Every animal that moved through it left a trail. He only had to learn how to recognize them. Elias followed the railway for another kilometer before noticing tracks leading into the trees. Small. Several pairs. He crouched. Rabbit. The tracks disappeared beneath a fallen branch. He followed them slowly. No sudden movements. No unnecessary noise. The rabbit appeared briefly between two bushes. Then vanished. Elias watched, waited, and followed. His grandfather's old notes explained several simple traps. Nothing complicated. Nothing that required much equipment. Elias used a piece of thin wire from his repair kit and constructed a small snare near a narrow passage between fallen branches. Then he moved away. He didn't expect immediate success. He continued searching. Near a frozen stream, he found another set of tracks. Larger. Four-legged. Probably a deer. Elias followed them for several minutes before stopping. The tracks led toward a clearing. There, a small deer stood beneath the trees. It was thin. Its ribs were slightly visible beneath its winter coat. Elias slowly lowered his weapon. He could hunt it. A single deer could provide a large amount of food. But he remembered the animal he'd seen near the bunker. The deer that had wandered through the snow-covered garden. He couldn't bring himself to shoot. Not today. Instead, he stepped backward. The deer raised its head. Their eyes met. Then it disappeared into the forest. Elias continued toward the frozen stream. The ice looked thick. He tested it with the end of his crowbar. Solid. He carefully stepped onto it. Halfway across, he heard a crack. Elias immediately stepped back. The ice wasn't safe enough. He walked along the bank instead. A few minutes later, he found a narrow section where the stream was mostly frozen but still contained several open patches of water. Fish. He could see them beneath the surface. Small, but enough for a meal. Elias remembered another section of his grandfather's journal. Never underestimate small food. He used a simple fishing line from his emergency kit. It took nearly an hour. Nothing. He waited. Moved the line. Waited again. Finally, a tug. Elias pulled. A small fish broke through the water. He caught it. Then another. 2 fish weren't much, but they were fresh food. And they had cost him almost nothing. By afternoon, Elias returned to the rabbit trap. Nothing. The snare remained untouched. He wasn't disappointed. Not every attempt worked. He reset it and continued. On the way back to his temporary camp, he noticed something unusual. A cluster of berries. Most were frozen, but several remained edible. Elias carefully identified them using the field guide stored in his backpack. He only took the ones he could positively identify. The rest remained untouched. Back at camp, Elias started a small fire. He cleaned the fish, then wrapped them in foil from his emergency supplies. The smell of cooking food filled the cold forest. For a moment, the apocalypse disappeared. There was only fire, food, snow, and silence. Elias took his first bite. It wasn't great. It wasn't terrible either. He smiled. I'll take it. After eating, he studied the area around his camp. Animal tracks, broken branches, a few patches of edible plants, potential water sources. He realized something important. The forest wasn't empty. It was full of life. Hidden beneath the snow, animals were surviving, plants were surviving, even insects would survive the winter. Everything was adapting. He needed to do the same. As the sun began to set, Elias returned to the rabbit trap. This time, it had worked. A small rabbit had been caught. Elias stood quietly for several seconds. He didn't celebrate. He simply thanked the animal. Then prepared it carefully. He kept everything usable. The meat, the hide, even the bones. Waste was a luxury he couldn't afford. That night, he cooked the rabbit over the fire. The meal was small, but it was enough. He saved part of the meat for tomorrow. The remaining portion went into a sealed container. Then he packed the bones separately. His grandfather's notes mentioned using them to make broth. Nothing had to be wasted. After dinner, Elias checked the radio. Static. He adjusted the frequency. Nothing. He waited. Still nothing. For once, he wasn't worried. The signal could wait. Survival came first. He opened his journal. Day 139. Crossed the bridge yesterday. Today I learned how to hunt in winter. Caught 2 fish. Caught 1 rabbit. Found edible berries. Saw a deer but didn't hunt it. The forest has more food than I expected. He paused. Then wrote. I don't need the bunker to survive. It taught me how to survive without it. Elias closed the journal. The fire crackled softly. Snow continued falling through the trees. For the first time since leaving home, he felt less like a boy who had escaped a disaster. He felt like someone who could actually survive beyond his bunker. Before sleeping, Elias checked the rabbit trap one last time. Then he looked toward the railway. Tomorrow, he would return to the tracks. The factory was still waiting somewhere beyond the forest. And so was the signal. Elias pulled his blanket around himself. The forest remained cold. The world remained dangerous. But tonight, he had food, he had shelter, and he had learned something important. Survival wasn't about having everything. It was about learning how to live with what the world still gave you. Chapter 8. The Watcher. The forest remained quiet the following morning. Elias woke beside the dying fire and immediately checked his surroundings. Nothing. No movement between the trees. No fresh footprints near his sleeping area. No strange sounds. He packed his belongings and returned to the railway. The signal had not returned yet. That didn't bother him anymore. He knew the direction. Northwest. By late morning, Elias noticed something strange. Footprints. Not animal tracks. Human. They appeared several meters away from the railway and continued parallel to him through the forest. Elias stopped. The footprints stopped too. He looked behind him. Nothing. He walked forward. The footprints continued. He stopped again. They stopped. Elias frowned. Someone's following me. He didn't turn around. Instead, he kept walking at the same pace. After several minutes, he quietly moved off the railway. The footprints continued beside the tracks. Whoever was following him hadn't noticed. Elias crouched behind a fallen tree and waited. A minute passed. Then 2. Finally, a figure appeared between the trees. The same dark coat. The same heavy backpack. The same hood that hid the person's face. The Watcher. Elias held his breath. The stranger stopped beside the railway. They looked toward the direction Elias had been walking. Then slowly turned toward the forest. Toward Elias. Elias tightened his grip on his crowbar. The stranger didn't approach. Instead, they reached into their backpack. Elias prepared himself. But the stranger pulled out something small. A tin can. They placed it on top of a fallen tree. then walked away. Elias watched until the figure disappeared. He waited 10 minutes, then carefully approached the fallen tree. The can contained food, dried meat, 2 pieces, still sealed. Beside it was a small piece of paper. Elias unfolded it. You shouldn't travel hungry. Nothing else. No name, no explanation. Elias stared at the note. The handwriting wasn't his brother's. But the gesture, it wasn't hostile. He looked toward the trees. The stranger was gone. Elias considered leaving the food behind. Then his stomach growled. He sighed. Fine. He took 1 piece. The other remained in his pocket. He didn't trust the stranger enough to eat everything. Elias continued walking. But this time, he changed his route. Instead of following the railway directly, he took a parallel trail through the trees. He wanted to know whether the stranger would follow. For nearly an hour, nothing happened. Then, a branch snapped behind him. Elias turned. Nothing. Another branch. Farther away. He kept moving. Near midday, he reached a narrow ravine. The railway crossed above it. Elias stopped at the edge. The path down was steep. He decided to use the ravine as a shortcut. Halfway down, he heard a strange sound. A low growl. Elias froze. A zombie stumbled from behind a tree. Then another. Then a third. They had been trapped inside the ravine. Elias backed away. There was no easy escape. One zombie lunged. Elias swung his crowbar. The creature fell. Another came from the side. Elias dodged. He stumbled backward. His boot slipped on ice. He fell. The zombie raised its arms. Then, thud, something struck the zombie from behind. It collapsed. Elias stared. The watcher stood several meters away, holding a long wooden pole. The stranger moved quickly. One zombie. Then another. Then the third. Within seconds, the ravine was silent. The watcher turned toward Elias. For the first time, they stood only a few meters apart. Elias slowly rose. Who are you? No answer. Why are you following me? Silence. Elias tightened his grip on the crowbar. Are you with Station 7? The stranger's head tilted slightly. Still no answer. Then the stranger pointed, not at Elias, at his backpack. More specifically, the family journal sticking out from the side pocket. Elias immediately understood. You know about my family. The stranger nodded once. Elias's heart pounded. My brother. The stranger paused, then nodded again. Elias stepped forward. Where is he? The stranger pointed northwest, the same direction, then held up 2 fingers. 2 days, 2 weeks, 2 kilometers. Elias didn't know. How long ago? The stranger looked toward the railway, then held up 2 fingers again. Before Elias could ask another question, the watcher turned and walked away. Wait. Elias followed. The stranger didn't stop. Tell me his name. Nothing. Is he alive? The watcher finally stopped. For a moment, Elias thought they might answer. Instead, the stranger raised one hand, 2 fingers, then pointed northwest, and disappeared between the trees. Elias stood alone in the snow. His heart was racing. His brother was alive, at least. Someone who knew his brother seemed to believe he was. That was enough. For now, he returned to the railway. Before continuing, Elias opened his journal. Day 140. The watcher appeared again. They left food for me. They followed me. They saved me from 3 zombies. They know about my family. They know my brother. I asked if he was alive. They pointed northwest. Elias stopped writing, then added, I don't know whether I can trust them. But they had 3 chances to hurt me. They didn't. He closed the journal. That evening, Elias made camp beneath a rocky overhang. He ate the dried meat the watcher had left. It was salty, smoky, probably homemade. He wondered who had prepared it. He wondered how long the watcher had been following him. And most importantly, he wondered why they cared. Before sleeping, Elias checked the radio. Static. Then, beep. He looked northwest. The signal was stronger than before. He smiled faintly. Somewhere ahead, his brother was waiting. Or at least, someone was waiting who knew where his brother had gone. Elias pulled the blanket around himself. The journey continued. But now, he wasn't completely alone. Chapter 9. The Factory Beacon. Elias reached the industrial district on the 4th morning after leaving the forest. The trees had gradually disappeared. In their place stood warehouses, factories, loading yards, and enormous storage buildings. Everything was covered in snow. The railway continued straight through the center of the district. And somewhere ahead, the signal was waiting. Elias stopped beside an abandoned railway crossing. He checked the radio. Beep. A stronger signal than before. He checked the directional indicator. Northwest. Then another beep. This time, the receiver displayed. Signal strength, 71%. Elias stared at the number. That's the strongest yet. The factory couldn't be far. He followed the railway until the tracks disappeared behind a massive warehouse. Beyond it stood an enormous industrial complex. Several tall buildings surrounded a central tower. A rusted sign near the entrance read, North Star Industrial Processing. The letters were nearly covered by ice. Elias checked his map. The factory marked on the old railway map was exactly here. This was the place. He didn't enter immediately. Instead, he climbed onto the roof of a nearby maintenance building. From there, he could see most of the complex. Several buildings had collapsed. The main factory was still standing. A large chimney leaned dangerously to one side. Vehicles were abandoned across the loading yard. And at the center, a communications tower. Its red warning light blinked slowly. Flash. Pause. Flash. Elias raised his binoculars. The light was real. But was it the signal? He checked his receiver. Beep. The signal strength jumped. 83%. Elias's eyes widened. The tower was definitely transmitting. He had finally found the beacon. The problem was the factory yard. Dozens of zombies wandered between the buildings. Some were frozen in place. Others moved slowly through the snow. A few were trapped inside vehicles. The front entrance was impossible. Too exposed. Elias studied the map again. There was another entrance on the eastern side. A maintenance tunnel. He marked it. That would be his route. Before moving, Elias checked the area around the factory. He noticed several footprints. Fresh. Human. They led toward the eastern side. The Watcher. Maybe. Or someone else. Elias followed them from a distance. The tracks eventually disappeared near a drainage ditch. No person. No shelter. Nothing. He continued toward the maintenance entrance. The door was frozen shut. Elias pulled. Nothing. He tried again. Still nothing. He used his crowbar carefully. The ice cracked. The door opened several centimeters. Cold air rushed out. Elias slipped inside, then closed it behind him. The maintenance tunnel was completely dark. He turned on his flashlight. Pipes ran along the ceiling. Electrical cables hung from the walls. Snow had entered through cracks in the concrete. Elias moved slowly. Every sound echoed. He kept one hand on the wall. The tunnel eventually split into 3 directions. Left, right, straight ahead. He checked the old factory map. The communications tower was directly ahead. He continued forward. A faint hum grew louder. Electricity. The factory still had power. That shouldn't have been possible. Elias stopped. The generator systems must still be operating somewhere. He followed the sound. Eventually, he reached a large mechanical room. Inside stood an old backup generator. The machine was running. Fuel lines had been repaired recently. Someone had maintained it. Elias stared. This place isn't abandoned. He checked the floor. Fresh footprints. Human. More than one set. Some boots were large, others smaller. The footprints led toward a staircase. Elias tightened his grip on the crowbar. He didn't know who was maintaining the factory. He didn't know whether they were friendly. So he stayed quiet. The staircase led to the communications room. The door was slightly open. A green light blinked above it. Elias pushed the door carefully. Inside, radio equipment covered the walls. Old computers, signal amplifiers, emergency transmitters, and in the center of the room, a large beacon control panel. The signal was coming from here. Elias approached the console. The display read, Beacon active, automated transmission, route, northwest, status, unattended. His expression changed. Automated. He checked the system. The beacon had been programmed to transmit repeatedly. It wasn't Station 7 directly. It was a relay. Someone had created a chain of signals across the region. He found an old maintenance log beside the console. The latest entry was several weeks old. Beacon maintenance complete. Power stable. Relay remains active. Next destination, Northern Safehouse. Elias's heart began beating faster. Northern Safehouse. The same kind of location shown on the map from the abandoned camp. He turned another page. A hand-drawn route appeared. The railway. A mountain road. Then a settlement symbol. Elias copied everything. Then, the radio suddenly crackled. Elias froze. A voice came through. Any survivor receiving this relay. Static. Then, do not remain at the factory. Elias stared at the radio. The transmission continued. The beacon is compromised. His blood went cold. Compromised. Before he could understand, a noise echoed from the hallway. Footsteps. Human footsteps. More than one person. Elias immediately switched off his flashlight. The room went dark. He crouched beside the equipment. The footsteps grew louder. A door opened somewhere below. Voices. Muffled. Check the generator. Another voice replied. Someone's been here. Elias held his breath. They knew. Someone had discovered his presence. He looked toward the communications console. The beacon continued blinking. Active. The signal had brought him here. But it might also have brought someone else. Elias quietly moved toward a secondary exit marked on the map. The footsteps were approaching the communications room. He reached the door. Stopped. Listened. 3 people. Maybe 4. He couldn't risk being seen. He opened the emergency hatch. A narrow maintenance shaft waited behind it. Barely large enough for him. He squeezed inside. Then, closed the hatch. The communications room door opened. Light flooded across the floor. Someone entered. Elias remained perfectly still inside the shaft. He heard footsteps. A chair moved. Then someone spoke. Someone activated the console. Another voice answered. They're still here. Elias's heart pounded. A hand touched the communications panel. The beacon suddenly changed. Transmission interrupted. The red light on the tower outside went dark. The signal disappeared. Elias waited. He couldn't stay. He quietly crawled through the maintenance shaft until he reached another exit. It opened behind the factory. Snow poured into the narrow passage. Elias crawled out, then immediately covered the opening with snow and debris. He moved away from the building. From behind a row of abandoned trucks, he looked back. The factory tower stood against the gray sky. The beacon was dark. He had finally found the source of the signal. But instead of answers, he had found another mystery. Someone had been maintaining the system. Someone had recently entered the communications room. And someone had warned him not to stay. Elias opened his journal. Day 141. Found the factory beacon. Signal confirmed. Beacon is an automated relay. It directs survivors toward a northern safe house. Someone has recently maintained the equipment. I heard multiple people inside the factory. They knew someone was there. The beacon was shut down while I escaped. He stared at the final line. Then wrote. The signal wasn't leading me to my brother. It was leading me somewhere. He closed the journal. The factory disappeared behind the falling snow. Elias adjusted his backpack. The trail continued north, and somewhere beyond the industrial district. The next clue was waiting. Chapter 10. The Hidden Safe House. The factory disappeared behind Elias before sunset. He didn't look back. The warning was still fresh in his mind. Do not remain at the factory. The beacon had been compromised. Whatever was happening inside that industrial complex had nothing to do with him. Not yet. His objective remained simple. Follow the route. Find the northern safe house. And keep moving. The map from the factory showed a narrow mountain road leading northwest. Elias followed the railway until the tracks ended near an abandoned freight station. Beyond it, the terrain became steep. Snow covered the road almost completely. Walking became slower, harder, but the signal was still faintly detectable. Every few hours, his receiver produced a quiet beep. Northwest. He was going the right way. Near midday, Elias discovered something strange. A wooden marker stood beside the road, almost completely buried in snow. Only the top was visible. He cleared it with his glove. A tree had been carved into the wood. The Hart family symbol. Beneath it was an arrow. North. Elias looked at his map. The marker wasn't shown. That meant someone had placed it after the map was made. Recently. He followed the arrow. The road led into a narrow valley. Tall pine trees surrounded him on both sides. The mountains blocked the wind. For the first time in days, Elias could walk without fighting against the weather. Then he saw something between the trees. A stone wall. Old. Covered in moss and snow. Behind it stood a small cabin. Elias stopped. His receiver beeped. Beep. Stronger. He slowly approached. The cabin looked abandoned. The windows were covered. The roof was buried beneath snow. There was no smoke from the chimney. No footprints. No movement. Elias checked the door. Locked. He searched around the building. Nothing. Then he noticed a wooden post beside the cabin. The heart symbol had been carved into it. This wasn't just a random cabin. It was the safe house. Elias found the entrance beneath the porch. A metal hatch. He brushed away the snow. 3 symbols were carved into the lock. A tree. An arrow. 3 stars. The same symbol he had found inside his family's bunker. His heart began beating faster. He took out the old family card. The 3-star symbol matched exactly. He placed the card against the lock. Nothing happened. Then he noticed a small indentation beneath the symbols. A keyhole. Elias remembered the brass key. The same key his family had used to unlock the bunker. He inserted it. Click. The hatch opened. A narrow staircase descended underground. Elias turned on his flashlight. The stairs continued deeper than expected. 10 steps. 20. 30. At the bottom, another steel door. This one opened automatically when he pulled the handle. Warm air touched his face. Elias stared. The safe house still had power. Inside was a small underground shelter. Not nearly as large as his bunker, but carefully designed. A sleeping area, kitchen, water tank, storage shelves, generator room, radio equipment, a small emergency garden. Everything was clean. Everything was organized. Someone had built this place to survive. And judging by the condition, someone had used it recently. Elias checked the food supplies. Canned vegetables, dried rice, beans, water purification tablets, medical supplies, winter clothing. There was enough to stay for several weeks. He almost laughed from relief. After sleeping in buses, forests, and abandoned buildings, a real bed felt like luxury. He dropped his backpack, then sat down. For several minutes, he simply enjoyed the warmth. But something bothered him. The shelter was too clean. Someone had been maintaining it. The generator had fresh fuel. The water filter had been recently replaced. The emergency batteries were charged. And on the kitchen table, a cup, still containing a little dried residue. Someone had been here, recently, very recently. Elias searched the shelter carefully. Behind the kitchen shelves, he discovered a small archive. Not many documents, only a handful of journals. Most were old. The first belonged to his grandfather. Elias recognized the handwriting immediately. He opened it. The first page contained a date from decades ago. Safe House 3 completed. Location remains undisclosed. Primary purpose, emergency refuge for Hart family members. Secondary purpose, temporary shelter for trusted survivors. Elias stared at the final sentence. Trusted survivors. His family hadn't built these places only for themselves. He kept reading. The next page contained instructions. If the main bunker is compromised, travel north. Follow the railway. Use the marked shelters. Never travel directly between shelters. Assume the roads are watched. Elias slowly lowered the journal. His family had planned routes, shelters, signals, escape points. This wasn't just one bunker. It was a network. He searched through the remaining records. One journal was newer, much newer. The handwriting was unmistakable. His brother. Elias's hands began trembling. He sat down. The first entry was dated several months after the apocalypse began. I reached Safe House 3. The main bunker should still be secure. If Elias ever finds this, he probably ignored everyone's advice and followed the trail. Elias laughed softly. His eyes immediately filled with tears. That's definitely you. He continued reading. His brother had stayed in the safe house for several days. He repaired the generator, restocked food, updated the radio. Then he left. The final entry was short. I'm continuing north. The signal is still active. If Elias follows the trail, I'll leave something for him at every safe location. Keep going, little brother. I'll see you ahead. Elias closed the journal. He pressed it against his chest. For the first time since the apocalypse began, he knew his brother hadn't simply disappeared. He had been moving, surviving, leaving a trail. For him, Elias searched the safe house again. This time, he wasn't looking for supplies. He was looking for a message. Behind the radio equipment, he found one, a small envelope. His name was written on it. Elias. He opened it carefully. Inside was a simple note. You're closer than you think. But don't rush. The trail ahead is dangerous. Stay alive first. Find me second. Elias smiled, still telling me what to do. He placed the note inside his journal. Before sleeping, Elias checked the radio. Static. Then, beep. The signal was strong, much stronger than before. He checked the direction. Northwest. Exactly where his brother had gone. Elias looked around the safe house. For the first time, he understood what his family had really built. The bunker wasn't a single secret. It was one piece of something much larger. A hidden network. A legacy designed to keep people alive. That night, Elias slept in a real bed. Warm blanket. Locked door. Full stomach. For several hours, he dreamed of home. Not the ruined house above his bunker. His childhood home. His brother laughing. His mother cooking. His father working in the garden. A life before everything changed. Before going to sleep completely, Elias opened his journal. Day 143. Found the northern safe house. It was built by my family. Grandfather called it Safe House 3. My brother stayed here. He left a journal. He is alive. He continued north. He knew I might follow him. He left messages for me. Elias stared at the final line. Then wrote, I'm coming, big brother. But I'll do it your way. I'll stay alive first. He closed the journal. Outside, snow continued falling over the hidden cabin. Deep underground, the safe house lights remained warm. For the first time in months, Elias didn't feel like he was chasing a ghost. He was following a person. His brother had been here, and he had deliberately left the door open for Elias to follow. Chapter 11. Wolves. The first night inside Safe House 3 was the warmest night Elias had experienced since leaving home. He slept deeply. No freezing wind. No uncomfortable bus seat. No footsteps outside. No zombies scratching against doors. Only the quiet hum of the generator. For the first time in days, his body finally relaxed. Elias woke shortly after sunrise. The room was still warm. He made breakfast from the safe house supplies and checked the generator. Everything was functioning properly. He also inspected the radio. The signal remained active, weak, but steady. Northwest. His brother's trail continued. Before leaving, Elias decided to spend one more day at the safe house. His supplies needed reorganizing. His clothes needed drying. His boots needed repairs. And after the bridge crossing and the long journey through the forest, he needed rest. He cleaned the small kitchen, reorganized the food shelves, checked the water filter, then inspected the emergency garden. Only a few plants remained alive. He watered them carefully. Someone kept you alive. He smiled. I'll do the same. Around midday, Elias heard something outside. A low sound. Growl. He froze. Another. Growl. He slowly walked toward the window. Outside the cabin, a wolf stood in the snow. Then another appeared. Then another. Elias counted. 1, 2, 5, 7. More shapes moved between the trees. A whole pack. The wolves looked thin. Their fur was dirty from the winter. Several had visible ribs. They weren't healthy. They were starving. Elias immediately understood why they had come. The safe house smelled like food. Warmth. Human presence. The pack had probably been following animal trails through the mountains. Now they had discovered something better. A possible source of food. Elias didn't open the door. He didn't approach the windows. He simply watched. The largest wolf stood at the front. Its fur was dark gray. One ear had a small tear. It stared directly at the cabin. Elias stared back. Neither moved. The wolves spread out around the safe house. One sat beside the porch. Another walked around the back. Two disappeared behind the trees. They weren't attacking. Not yet. They were waiting. Elias checked the door locks. Secure. The windows were reinforced. The basement entrance was steel. He was safe. But the wolves could wait longer than he could. Elias opened his grandfather's old journal. He remembered reading about wolves during winter. A starving animal is dangerous. But fear makes humans more dangerous than animals. Another passage continued. Don't challenge a pack unless you must. Elias closed the journal. Good advice. He decided to observe them. For the next several hours, he didn't make a move. The wolves didn't either. One occasionally wandered around the cabin. Another lay beneath a pine tree. The largest remained near the front entrance. Watching. Waiting. Elias noticed something. The pack wasn't aggressive toward each other. They were organized. The older wolf remained near the front. The younger wolves stayed farther back. One smaller wolf seemed to have difficulty walking. Its rear leg was injured. Elias watched it struggle through the snow. The animal stopped, sat down, then slowly lowered itself to the ground. Elias frowned. He opened the safehouse medical cabinet. Bandages, antiseptic, pain medication, nothing he could safely use without approaching. He looked outside again. The injured wolf remained alone. Elias knew the risk. If he opened the door, the entire pack could react. Still, leaving the animal to suffer didn't feel right. He prepared something else. Food, not from his emergency supplies. He opened the safehouse's storage room and found a bag of dried meat that was close to its expiration date. He cut several pieces into smaller portions, then filled a metal bowl with water. He placed both near the outer edge of the porch. But he didn't open the main door. Instead, he used the emergency service hatch, a small exterior compartment designed for passing supplies outside without opening the shelter. Elias pushed the food through, then closed it. The wolves immediately noticed. The largest stood. It approached slowly. Elias watched through the window. The wolf stopped several meters from the food. It looked at the cabin, then at the food, then back at the cabin. It didn't eat. Instead, it waited. Elias stayed still. After several minutes, the wolf finally stepped forward. It sniffed the meat, then took one piece. It carried the food toward the others. The younger wolves ate first. Only afterward did the largest wolf eat. Elias smiled. "You're the leader." He gave them more water. The injured wolf approached last. It limped badly. The other wolves allowed it to eat. Elias watched quietly. The pack wasn't mindless. They cared for their weakest member. That reminded him of his brother. How he had always saved the better food for Elias when they were children. How he had walked beside him when Elias was afraid. How he had always said, "Stay behind me." Elias looked away from the window. For a moment, the wolves reminded him of family. That evening, the pack remained outside. But they were calmer now. The largest wolf sat several meters from the cabin. It no longer stared aggressively at the windows. The injured wolf slept near the porch. Elias didn't approach. He simply left another small portion of food outside, then returned inside. The next morning, the wolves were still there. But something had changed. There were fewer. Some had left. During the night, 3 remained. The largest, the injured one, and a young wolf. Elias checked the injured animal again. Its leg looked swollen. He couldn't leave medicine outside without knowing whether it was safe. But he could leave clean water. He did. Around noon, Elias finally opened the exterior service door. Not the main entrance. The small hatch opened only a few centimeters. He placed a bowl of water outside. The wolves watched. The largest stood. Elias froze. The wolf walked closer. 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 It stopped just outside the hatch. Elias could see its eyes clearly. Neither moved. Then the wolf lowered its head. It drank. Elias slowly pulled the hatch closed. No attack. No growling. Only trust. A very small amount. But trust nonetheless. That afternoon, Elias needed to retrieve firewood from the shed. He waited until the wolves moved away from the cabin. Then carefully stepped outside. The largest wolf watched him. Elias stopped. He didn't raise his weapon. He didn't threaten it. He simply spoke softly. "I'm just getting wood." The wolf tilted its head. Elias walked slowly toward the shed. The wolf followed several meters behind. Not attacking. Watching. Elias gathered the wood. When he returned, the wolf was sitting beside the path. He stopped. The animal stared at him. Then turned toward the forest. It took several steps. Stopped. Looked back. Elias frowned. "You want me to follow you?" The wolf waited. Elias didn't move. After a few seconds, it continued into the trees. The young wolf followed. The injured wolf remained near the cabin. Elias watched them disappear. He didn't follow. Not yet. He understood something important. Respect wasn't the same as trust. And trust wasn't something he could force. He had survived this long by knowing when not to take unnecessary risks. So he returned inside. By sunset, the wolves were gone. All of them. Only footprints remained around the safe house. Elias stood on the porch and looked toward the forest. The injured wolf had left with the others. He hoped it would survive. He hoped the pack would find food. He hoped. They might cross paths again. Before bed, Elias opened his journal. Day 144. A wolf pack surrounded Safe House 3 today. 7 wolves at first. They were starving. 1 was injured. I gave them food and water. They didn't attack. The pack left this evening. He paused, then added, animals don't always need to be enemies. Sometimes they just need a reason not to fear you. He closed the journal. Later that night, the radio crackled. Elias opened his eyes. Beep. The signal. Northwest. Then another sound. A faint voice. Safe House 3. Elias sat upright. The transmission was barely audible. If you stayed there. Static. The wolves may have found you. Another burst of static. Then, don't hurt them. The signal disappeared. Elias stared at the radio. A small smile appeared. Someone knew about the wolves. Someone knew about the safe house. And whoever was broadcasting had known exactly where he would be. Elias looked toward the dark window. The forest was empty. But somewhere beyond the trees, the wolves were moving through the snow. And for the first time since leaving the bunker, Elias wondered if the wilderness itself might become an ally. Chapter 12. Station 7. The radio woke Elias before sunrise. A faint crackle came from the communications room. He opened his eyes. For a moment, he didn't move. Then, beep. Elias sat up. The signal. He grabbed his notebook and hurried into the communications room. The receiver was already active. A green light blinked on the old console. Then the voice came through. Clearer than ever. This is Station 7. Elias stopped breathing for a moment. He had heard those words many times. But never like this. The signal was strong, stable, almost as if the transmitter was nearby. The voice continued. If you're receiving this transmission, you're likely traveling north through the old railway corridor. Elias immediately wrote it down. Do not use the main highways. Do not approach large settlements without observation. Several survivor groups have become territorial. Elias paused. The warning matched everything he had already learned. The highway, the factory, the strange footprints, the watcher. None of it had been random. The broadcast continued. There are currently 3 known safe routes through the northern region. A map appeared on the small monitor beside the radio. Elias leaned closer. 3 lines. 3 routes. One followed the railway. Another passed through the mountains. The third went east toward the old military road. Then the screen displayed. Railway route, recommended. Elias smiled faintly. That's the one I'm using. Station 7 continued. Safe house locations are marked by a tree symbol. Elias looked toward his family journal. The heart symbol. If you encounter a marked shelter, do not assume it is occupied. Some are emergency only. Others are maintained by survivors. Elias immediately thought of Safe House 3. Someone had maintained it. Someone had been there. His brother. Then the broadcast became more serious. Do not reveal the locations of safe houses over open radio. Elias stopped writing. Do not give your real name. Do not describe your supplies. Do not reveal your group size. Assume every transmission can be heard. Elias slowly looked toward the radio. The warning was simple, but important. Someone could be listening. A second voice suddenly appeared. Different, older, more tired. Station 7, we've got movement near Sector 4. The first voice responded. How many? At least 20. Static. Are they infected? A pause. No. Elias's expression changed. Survivors. Not zombies. Another group was moving through the region. The transmission continued. They're armed. The first voice answered immediately. Don't engage. Understood. Then the conversation ended. Elias sat quietly. Station 7 wasn't just broadcasting survival advice. They were watching the region. Monitoring movements. Tracking settlements. Perhaps helping people avoid dangerous groups. It sounded organized. Almost like a small emergency network. Then the voice returned. To anyone traveling north. Static briefly interrupted the transmission. If you have reached Safe House 3. Elias froze. The radio knew. You are approximately 2 days from the next marked shelter. Elias looked at the map. His brother's route. The safe house network. The signal. Everything connected. Then came another warning. Do not follow the main road from Safe House 3. Elias frowned. The next line made him sit upright. There has been activity along that route. He quickly marked it on his map. Use the mountain trail instead. A route appeared on the screen. A narrow line winding through the mountains. Elias studied it. It looked longer, more difficult, but safer. The transmission continued. If you find a Hart family marker. Elias's hand stopped. The voice paused. Then, follow it. Elias stared at the radio. Station 7 knew about his family. Not just the safehouses, the symbols, the network, his brother. How? Before he could wonder further, a second transmission interrupted. This one was extremely faint. A single voice. Elias. His blood went cold. He leaned toward the radio. What? Static. He adjusted the frequency. Elias Hart. His heart pounded. Someone had said his name. Then the signal disappeared. Station 7 returned. If you're listening, static, we know you're out there. Elias stared at the receiver. He didn't touch the microphone. He remembered the rule. Never reveal yourself. But whoever was speaking already knew. The final message came through slowly. Your family prepared for this. Your brother is following the northern route. If you want to find him, stay alive. Then, click. The transmission ended. Silence returned. Elias remained in the chair. He didn't move for several minutes. His brother. Station 7 knew about him. The safehouses. The family symbols. The northern route. Too many pieces were connected. He opened his journal. Day 145. Station 7 broadcast a complete message. Confirmed Northern Safehouse Network. Confirmed Hart family markers. Recommended mountain route. Warned about armed survivor groups. Someone said my name over the transmission. Station 7 knows about my brother. They told me to stay alive. Elias stopped. Then wrote, I think Station 7 has been watching the trail. He closed the journal. Before leaving Safehouse 3, Elias made one final inspection. Food, water, generator, radio. Everything was ready. He left a small portion of food and water for any survivor who might come after him. Then he wrote a message beside the supplies. Safehouse is secure. Mountain route recommended. Do not use the main road. Stay alive. He didn't sign it. He didn't need to. The message was meant for anyone who needed it. Elias stepped outside. Snow covered the cabin. The forest was quiet. He adjusted his backpack. The mountain trail waited ahead. For months, he had thought surviving meant hiding. Then he learned how to scavenge. How to travel. How to hunt. How to trust carefully. Now he was learning something else. Survival wasn't just about finding safe places. It was about knowing which places were safe. And knowing who was watching them. Elias looked toward the mountains. Somewhere beyond them, his brother continued north. He started walking. Chapter 13, Smoke on the Horizon. Elias left Safehouse 3 just after sunrise. The mountain trail was narrow and covered in fresh snow. He followed the route Station 7 had recommended, keeping the old map tucked safely inside his jacket. The railway was now far behind him. Ahead, only mountains, pine forests, and a long stretch of white wilderness. The climb was difficult. Elias moved slowly, conserving his energy. Every hour, he stopped to check his water and adjust his backpack. The signal remained weak, but it was still there. Northwest. That was enough. He continued. By afternoon, Elias reached the top of a rocky ridge. He stopped to rest. The view from the ridge was enormous. Snow-covered mountains stretched across the horizon. The forest below looked endless. Elias took out his binoculars. At first, he saw nothing unusual. Then, smoke. A thin column rose beyond the trees. Elias lowered the binoculars. He looked again. The smoke was too steady to be from a random campfire. There was more than one column. Then another. And another. Elias slowly realized what he was looking at. A settlement. He studied the area carefully. Buildings. Fences. Several vehicles. Smoke rising from chimneys. The settlement was much larger than the small camps he had encountered. Perhaps dozens of people. Maybe more. Elias felt a strange mixture of relief and caution. People were alive. A lot of people. That should have been good news. But large groups came with problems. More people meant more food was needed. More water. More security. More disagreements. And more chances for someone to become dangerous. Elias sat behind a rock and watched. He didn't approach. Not yet. He checked the settlement through his binoculars. A tall wooden fence surrounded most of it. Watch platforms stood at several points. People moved along the perimeter. 2 guards carried weapons. Others appeared to be working. Someone was clearing snow. Someone else was carrying firewood. A small group was repairing a vehicle. It looked organized, not chaotic. That made Elias even more cautious. He opened his journal. Observation. Location. Unknown settlement. Estimated size. Large. Security. High. Food production. Unknown. Residents. Active. Weapons. Visible. Threat level. Unknown. He paused. Then wrote, "Do not approach yet." Elias spent the next hour watching. Nothing immediately seemed wrong. There were no bodies hanging from the fence. No signs of fighting. No obvious zombies inside. People seemed to cooperate. Children weren't visible, but that didn't mean there weren't any. The settlement appeared to be functioning. For the first time since leaving the bunker, Elias saw something resembling normal life. A person carried a wooden crate through the gate. Another opened the gate for them. Someone shouted something. People laughed. Elias couldn't hear the words from this distance. But the sound itself was strange. Laughter. He hadn't heard it in a long time. He lowered his binoculars. For a moment, he wanted to go there. Just to speak to someone. Just to hear another human voice without a radio between them. Then he remembered the factory. The people inside. The warning. Someone's been here. The beacon is compromised. He looked at the settlement again. Large groups could be safe. They could also be dangerous. He didn't know which this was. As the afternoon passed, Elias moved to another observation point. He discovered a narrow trail leading toward the settlement. Fresh footprints covered it. People regularly used the path. That meant approaching wouldn't be impossible. But it also meant someone would probably notice him. He sat in the snow and thought. He had enough food, enough water, enough supplies to continue. He didn't need the settlement. That was important. If he entered, he should have a reason. Not desperation. The smoke continued rising. Elias watched the settlement as evening approached. Lights appeared inside several buildings. Warm yellow lights. For a few moments, the place looked almost peaceful. Almost like the world before. Elias imagined sitting inside one of those buildings. Warm food, a chair, other people, conversation, maybe even laughter. Then he imagined losing the safety of the bunker because he had trusted the wrong people. He shook his head. No, he wasn't ready. He checked the radio. Static. Then, beep. The signal. Northwest. The settlement wasn't directly along the signal's direction. It was slightly east. That made the decision easier. Elias could continue following the signal without entering. He didn't have to risk anything. Not yet. He packed his binoculars. Before leaving the ridge, he looked at the settlement one last time. He didn't hate the people there. He wasn't afraid of them. He simply didn't know them. And that was enough reason to be careful. Elias opened his journal again. Day 146. Saw a large survivor settlement from the mountain ridge. It appears organized and heavily guarded. People are actively living there. No obvious signs of violence. I considered approaching. I decided not to. He stared at the smoke rising into the evening sky. Then added, maybe one day. Just not today. Elias descended the ridge before darkness completely settled. The settlement slowly disappeared behind the trees. He followed the mountain trail northwest. The smoke remained visible above the forest for several hours. A reminder that he wasn't the only survivor. There were others. People building lives. People protecting homes. People trying to survive in their own ways. Perhaps one day, Elias would meet them. But tonight, he had another destination. The signal. His brother's trail. And the road ahead. As night fell, Elias stopped beneath a rocky overhang. He made a small fire. Ate a simple meal. Then checked the radio. Beep. Northwest. Still there. Elias smiled faintly. Keep calling. He looked toward the distant smoke one final time. Then turned his back on it. For now, he would remain alone. Chapter 14. Hunters. Elias left the ridge before sunrise. The settlement disappeared behind the mountains, but the smoke remained visible above the trees. He didn't regret his decision. Not approaching had been the right choice. At least for now. He followed the mountain trail northwest, keeping the radio tucked beneath his coat. The signal remained weak, but steady. Northwest. By late morning, Elias noticed something strange. Footprints. Human. Fresh. He crouched beside them. One person. Heavy boots. Heading in the same direction he was traveling. Elias frowned. The tracks weren't from the watcher. The tread pattern was different. He checked the surrounding snow. There were more footprints farther ahead. 2. Then 3. He slowly stood. I'm being followed. Elias didn't panic. He had learned something important during his journey. Being followed didn't always mean being hunted. But he couldn't assume they were friendly either. He stepped off the main trail. Instead of continuing northwest, he moved toward a group of trees. Then he waited. 20 minutes passed. Nothing. Then a figure appeared. A man carrying a rifle. Another followed behind him. Then a third. They stopped at the trail. The first man crouched beside Elias's footprints. He studied them, then pointed toward the forest. The others followed. Elias stayed completely still. They had found his trail. The 3 men moved into the trees. Elias watched them carefully. They weren't wandering. They were tracking. One of them held something in his hand. A piece of cloth. Elias looked down at his own clothing. One of his backpack straps had a loose thread. Could they have followed him from the ridge? Maybe. He had been too visible while observing the settlement. The hunters spread out. One moved left. Another moved right. The third stayed in the center. They were experienced. That worried Elias more than their weapons. He slowly backed away, then stepped on a branch. Crack. All 3 men turned. Elias ran. He didn't run toward the trail. He went downhill. The slope was steep, but snow softened his steps. Behind him. He's there. A voice. Then another. Don't let him reach the road. Elias's heart raced. They were definitely hunting him. He pushed through the trees. Branches scratched his coat. Snow fell from above. He heard footsteps behind him. The hunters were following. Elias looked for somewhere to hide. A rock formation. Too exposed. A fallen tree. Too small. Then he spotted an old drainage tunnel beneath the mountain road. He slid down the slope and crawled inside. The tunnel was narrow, dark, wet. Elias pulled his backpack close and moved deeper. The footsteps reached the entrance. He stopped breathing. One hunter entered. His flashlight swept across the tunnel. Elias pressed himself against the wall. The light came closer, closer, then stopped. Nothing. Another voice answered from outside. Check farther. The hunter moved deeper. Elias waited, then noticed something beside his boot. A narrow opening. A second tunnel. He crawled into it. The passage led beneath the road. Elias followed it for several minutes. Then emerged on the opposite side of the mountain. He immediately covered the entrance with loose snow. The hunters were still searching the first tunnel. Elias moved away. Quietly. Carefully. He eventually reached an abandoned ranger station. The building was small, but sturdy. He entered through a broken window and searched the interior. Empty. No recent footprints. No food. No useful supplies. But it offered shelter. Elias climbed into the attic. From there, he could see the mountain road. The hunters emerged from the tunnel. 3 of them. They looked around. One pointed toward the northwest. Another shook his head. They had lost him. Elias remained in the attic for several hours. He didn't move. He didn't make a fire. He didn't turn on the radio. He simply waited. Eventually, the hunters disappeared down the road. Only then did Elias relax. He checked his backpack. Nothing missing. But one important thing had changed. His water bottle had cracked during the chase. Most of the water had leaked into the snow. Elias stared at the empty container. Great. He had enough remaining water for the night. Maybe tomorrow morning. After that, he would need another source. Elias opened his map. There was a stream several kilometers northwest. Frozen, but potentially accessible. He marked it. Then he marked the ranger station. If the hunters returned, he couldn't stay. He needed to leave before sunrise. As evening approached, Elias finally turned on the radio. Static. He waited. Nothing. He turned it off. He didn't want the signal attracting attention. Then, a faint sound outside. Elias froze. Footsteps. He reached for the crowbar. The footsteps stopped near the ranger station. Someone entered the building. Elias slowly moved toward the attic opening. A figure walked through the lower room. One person, not 3. The stranger looked around, then placed something on the floor. Elias recognized the dark coat. The Watcher. Elias remained silent. The Watcher looked toward the attic. For a moment, neither moved. Then the Watcher pointed toward the northwest. Elias nodded. The Watcher pointed toward the road. Then made a motion with one hand. Danger. Elias understood. The hunters were still nearby. The watcher reached into their coat and placed a small water bottle beside the wall. Then walked toward the exit. Elias finally whispered, "Thank you." The watcher stopped, but didn't turn around, then disappeared into the snow. Elias climbed down. He picked up the bottle. Full. Clean. He looked at the doorway. The watcher was already gone. Again. No explanation. No name. Just help. That night, Elias slept in the attic. His backpack beneath his head. Crowbar beside him. Water bottle within reach. The hunters didn't return, but he knew they hadn't simply disappeared. They were somewhere out there, looking for him. Before sleeping, Elias wrote in his journal. Day 147. 3 armed survivors followed my trail. They were tracking me deliberately. I escaped through a drainage tunnel. Lost most of my water during the chase. The watcher appeared again. They warned me the hunters were still nearby. They left me water. Elias paused, then wrote, "Someone is hunting me. Someone else is protecting me. I still don't know why." He closed the journal. Outside, snow began falling again. The mountains disappeared beneath darkness. Far away, a flashlight moved between the trees. Then another. The hunters were still searching. Elias pulled his blanket closer. He couldn't stay here. Tomorrow morning, he would leave before they found him again. And this time, he would make sure they couldn't follow his trail. Chapter 15. The journal page. Elias left the ranger station before sunrise. He didn't wait for the hunters to return. The snow had covered most of his footprints during the night, which gave him a small advantage. He followed the mountain trail carefully, staying away from the main road. Every few minutes, he looked behind him. Nothing. No flashlights. No voices. No hunters. For now, he was safe. The trail eventually descended into a narrow valley. A frozen stream ran alongside it. Elias stopped to refill his water bottle. He broke through a thin layer of ice and collected water from underneath. Then he used his purification tablets. While waiting, he checked his map. The next marked shelter was still ahead. But the route was becoming increasingly difficult. The mountain trail split into several smaller paths. Elias chose the one marked with a small heart family symbol. Northwest. Always northwest. Around midday, he discovered an abandoned roadside building. It looked like an old tourist information center. The roof had partially collapsed. The windows were broken. Snow covered most of the entrance. Elias almost walked past it. Then he saw something carved into the wooden door. A tree. The heart symbol. He stopped. Another family marker. Elias entered. The building was empty. Old brochures covered the floor. A broken desk stood near the entrance. Several maps remained pinned to the wall. He searched the rooms carefully. Nothing useful. No food. No water. No weapons. Then he noticed a metal filing cabinet. One drawer was still locked. He forced it open. Inside were old documents, road maps, emergency plans, shelter locations, and several handwritten pages. Elias began sorting through them. Then he found something familiar. A notebook page. The handwriting made his heart stop. His brother. Elias sat down immediately. He had seen his brother's journal at Safe House 3. But this was different. This page looked like it had been torn from that same journal. The edges were uneven. Someone had ripped it out. Elias carefully unfolded it. The page began with a date. Several weeks earlier. His brother had written, "The northern route is still open. Station 7 continues broadcasting. The factory relay is becoming unreliable. I don't know who has taken control of some of the stations." Elias's expression hardened. So his brother had known about the compromised beacon. He continued reading. "I've seen groups moving through the mountains. Some are looking for supplies. Others are looking for people." Elias remembered the hunters. His grip tightened around the paper. The next section was shorter. "I found another heart marker today. Someone has been using the old network. That means the family shelters aren't as secret as they used to be." Elias stared at the sentence. The safe houses weren't completely hidden anymore. Other people knew about them. That explained the warnings, the factory, the hunters, the strange activity around the shelters. Then came the part that made Elias stop reading. If Elias is following my trail, he needs to understand something. The shelters are not the destination. They're the path. Elias slowly lowered the page. The path. He read it again. The bunker. Safe House 3. The factory. The railway. Station 7. None of them were the final destination. They were all guiding him somewhere. The final paragraph had been written in a hurry. The handwriting became uneven. I'm going farther north. There is a place beyond the mountains where several survivors are gathering. I don't know whether they're safe. But Station 7 believes they can help rebuild. If Elias finds this page, don't follow me blindly. Think first. Survive first. Then decide whether you still want to find me. Elias stared at the last sentence. For a long time, he didn't move. His brother wasn't simply leaving clues. He was trying to protect him. Every message had the same meaning. Don't rush. Don't take unnecessary risks. Stay alive. Elias folded the page carefully. He placed it inside the journal. Then he noticed something written at the bottom. A small line, almost hidden beneath the fold. P.S. You always hated being told to wait. Elias laughed. A quiet, unexpected laugh. You're still annoying. For a moment, the empty building didn't feel so lonely. Elias searched the rest of the information center. This time, he knew what he was looking for. A map of the region beyond the mountains. He found one behind the main desk. Several routes had been marked in red. One route continued north, another went west, a third led toward a large valley. The northern route had a small handwritten note beside it. Settlement. Elias recognized the handwriting. His brother. He compared the map to the page. The settlement he'd seen from the ridge wasn't the final destination. It was farther east. His brother had traveled beyond it. Farther north, toward the valley. Elias marked the route, then folded the map. Before leaving, he placed the remaining documents back inside the cabinet. He didn't want to destroy the information. Other survivors might need it. But he took the torn journal page. That belonged to him. It was the closest thing to his brother's voice he'd had since the journey began. Outside, the snow had stopped. The sky was clear. Elias stood beside the trail and looked north. The mountains stretched endlessly ahead. Somewhere beyond them, his brother was still moving. Perhaps alone. Perhaps with others. Perhaps already close. Elias couldn't know. But now he understood the trail. He opened his journal. Day 148. Found an abandoned information center. Discovered another Hart family marker. Found a torn page from my brother's journal. He passed through here weeks ago. He knows about the compromised relay stations. He knows other people have discovered the family shelters. He is traveling farther north. Elias carefully placed the page between the journal's covers. Then wrote, "The shelters aren't the destination. They're the path." He stared toward the mountains. Then added, "I'm still following, but I'm not following blindly anymore." That evening, Elias made camp beneath a rocky ledge. He cooked a small meal. Checked his boots. Checked his supplies. Checked the map. Then read his brother's page one more time. The words were old, but they still felt like his brother was speaking directly to him. Elias folded the page. "Wait for me." He looked toward the north. Then corrected himself. "No." He smiled faintly. "Don't wait." He knew his brother wouldn't. So Elias would keep moving too. One careful step at a time. Chapter 16. The Long Night. The weather changed before sunset. Elias noticed it while descending the mountain trail. The sky had turned almost completely gray. The wind was stronger. Snow began falling sideways. He checked his map. The next marked shelter was still too far away. He wouldn't reach it before dark. He needed shelter now. Elias searched the surrounding area. Nothing. Only trees and rocks. Then he spotted a dark opening beneath the mountain. A shallow cave. It wasn't ideal, but it had one major advantage. It was protected from the wind. Elias approached carefully. He checked the entrance. No footprints. No animal tracks. No signs of recent use. He entered. The cave wasn't very deep. Maybe 15 meters. But the back section was dry. Elias cleared away loose snow and stones. He placed his sleeping bag against the wall. Then gathered firewood from outside. The storm was getting worse. He needed enough wood to last through the night. By the time he returned, the snow was falling heavily. His footprints were already disappearing. Elias hurried inside. He started a small fire. Warmth slowly filled the cave. He removed his wet gloves and placed them near the flames. Then checked his clothes. Damp. Not soaked. Good. He had learned from his grandfather's journals. Wet clothing could turn a cold night into a deadly one. Elias cooked a simple meal. Beans. Dried meat. A little bread. He ate slowly. The storm roared outside. The sound echoed through the cave. For several hours, Elias simply listened. Wind, snow, fire, nothing else. Around midnight, the fire began dying. Elias woke suddenly. The cave had become cold. He sat up. The wood pile was almost empty. He looked outside. The storm was still raging. Going outside now would be dangerous. But staying without fire would be worse. He had to choose. Elias checked his remaining firewood. 3 pieces. Maybe 2 hours of heat. Not enough. He pulled out his grandfather's journal. A passage caught his attention. During extreme weather, don't waste energy fighting the storm. Find the warmest place available and make your resources last. Elias looked around. The deepest part of the cave was warmer. He moved his sleeping bag farther inside. Then covered the entrance with a large emergency tarp. The wind became quieter. The cave immediately felt warmer. He didn't need a large fire. He needed a controlled one. Elias reduced the flames. 1 piece of wood, then another. He wrapped himself in his blanket. His backpack became a pillow. His boots remained beside him. He kept the crowbar within reach. Hours passed. The storm continued. Elias couldn't sleep properly. Every loud crack from outside woke him. Branches breaking, rocks shifting, wind pushing snow against the cave entrance. The world outside sounded like it was collapsing. He checked his watch. 2:17 a.m. Still hours until sunrise. Then he heard something different. A howl. Elias sat up. Another howl answered from farther away. Wolves. He smiled faintly. He wondered if they were the same pack from Safehouse 3. Probably not. But the sound was strangely comforting. Life was still out there. Even in the storm. Another sound followed. A low groan. Elias's smile disappeared. Zombie. The creature wandered near the cave entrance. Then another. Elias immediately extinguished the fire. Darkness filled the cave. He didn't move. The zombies passed outside. One stopped. Elias held his breath. The creature sniffed the air. The tarp moved slightly in the wind. The zombie remained there for several seconds. Then continued walking. Elias waited. 10 minutes. Nothing. Only then did he breathe again. The storm became even stronger. Snow covered the cave entrance. The tarp nearly collapsed. Elias carefully moved toward it. He pushed the snow away from the inside. Not too much. Just enough to keep the entrance from being completely buried. Then he returned to his sleeping bag. His hands were shaking. He wasn't sure whether it was the cold or fear. Probably both. At 4:36 a.m., the fire was almost gone. Elias had only 1 piece of wood left. He looked at it, then at the darkness outside. He could either use it now, or save it for morning. He chose to save it. Instead, he wrapped himself tightly in every layer he had. Hat, scarf, coat, blanket, sleeping bag. He curled into the smallest possible shape. Then waited. The longest hours of the night passed slowly. Elias thought about the bunker. The warm bed. The greenhouse. The generator. The food. The walls. The safety. He wondered whether leaving had been a mistake. Then he remembered the journal page. His brother's handwriting. Stay alive first. Elias closed his eyes. I am. Morning finally arrived. The storm weakened. Light appeared through the snow-covered entrance. Elias waited until the wind became manageable. Then he crawled outside. The world had changed. The entire landscape was buried beneath fresh snow. The trees were almost unrecognizable. His footprints were completely gone. The mountain trail had disappeared. So had the road. Elias stared at the blank white landscape. He took out his compass. Northwest. Still northwest. He checked his supplies. Food. Enough. Water. Enough for a while. Firewood. Almost gone. Energy. Low. He couldn't continue immediately. He needed to recover. Elias returned to the cave. Used his final piece of wood. Started a small fire. Then melted snow for water. While waiting, he noticed something carved into the cave wall. A tree. The Hart family symbol. Elias stared at it. Another marker. But this one was old. Very old. He brushed snow away from the carving. Beneath it was a small arrow. Northwest. His brother had probably seen it too. Maybe he had stopped here. Maybe he had used this exact cave during a storm. Elias touched the carving. You've been everywhere. He opened his journal. Day 149. Heavy snowstorm. Couldn't reach the next shelter. Took refuge inside a mountain cave. Nearly ran out of firewood. Zombies passed the entrance during the night. Storm buried the trail. Found another Hart family marker inside the cave. He paused. Then wrote. The trail keeps disappearing. But the markers remain. Elias packed his things. The storm had passed. The trail was gone. But his compass still worked. His map still worked. And his brother's messages were still with him. That was enough. He stepped outside. The mountain was covered in untouched snow. No road. No footprints. No visible path. Just white wilderness. Elias adjusted his backpack. Then took out the compass. Northwest. He started walking. One step. Then another. Behind him, the cave slowly disappeared beneath the snow. Ahead, the mountains waited. And somewhere beyond them, his brother's trail continued. Chapter 17, The Mountain Pass. The storm had erased everything. The trail, the footprints, even the small markers Elias had been following. Only the mountains remained. Elias stood outside the cave with his compass in one hand and his map in the other. The needle pointed northwest. He adjusted his backpack. Then northwest it is. The first few hours were slow. Fresh snow reached almost to Elias's knees. Every step required effort. He used his trekking pole to test the ground before putting his weight down. The mountain had become a completely different place after the storm. Rocks were hidden. Small cliffs looked like gentle slopes. Frozen streams were buried beneath snow. One mistake could mean a broken leg. And a broken leg out here could mean death. Elias stopped frequently to rest. He didn't want to repeat what happened during the storm. His energy was still low. He ate a small portion of dried meat and drank some water. Then checked his map. The next marked shelter was somewhere beyond the mountain pass. If he could reach the pass before night, he might make it. Around noon, he discovered another marker. A wooden post, half buried in snow. The heart symbol. Elias brushed the snow away. Beneath the tree was another arrow. Northwest. He smiled. Still following. He took a photograph. Then continued. The trail became steeper. Elias had to climb over several rocky sections. His gloves became wet. His fingers became numb. He stopped to warm them. Then kept going. At the top of the slope, he saw something. A narrow passage between two enormous mountains. The mountain pass. The map showed it clearly. Beyond the pass was the northern valley. Elias stared. He was almost there. Then he noticed the problem. The pass was blocked. Not by snow. By vehicles. Several abandoned trucks had been positioned across the narrow road. Some were burned. Others had been pushed sideways. A crude barricade. Elias approached carefully. Someone had built it deliberately. This wasn't an accident. He searched the area. Fresh footprints. Human. Several people had been here recently. There were also spent food wrappers. A broken crate. A small fire pit. Someone was using the pass. Elias immediately became cautious. He moved behind a rock. Then watched. Nothing. No movement. But the barricade told him enough. Someone didn't want people coming through. He checked the map. There was another route. A narrow trail around the eastern side of the pass. It would take longer. But it avoided the barricade. Elias chose the longer route. He had learned not to force his way through unknown territory. The eastern trail was difficult. It crossed a steep slope. One wrong step could send him sliding down the mountain. Elias moved slowly. 3 points of contact at all times. 1 hand, 2 feet, then switch. He remembered his brother teaching him how to climb when they were children. Don't look down. Elias smiled. You always said that. He continued. Halfway across the slope, a rock shifted beneath his boot. Elias slipped. His body dropped. His hand grabbed a tree root. For several seconds, he hung there. His backpack pulled downward. Snow slid beneath him. Elias gritted his teeth. Not today. He pulled himself up. Then lay flat on the snow. Breathing hard. He waited until his heartbeat slowed. Then continued. By late afternoon, he reached the other side. The mountain pass was behind him. The valley opened ahead. Elias stopped. The view took his breath away. A huge frozen valley stretched beneath the mountains. A river ran through the center. Several small structures dotted the landscape. Smoke rose from one area. Another settlement. But this one was much smaller than the one he had seen before. Elias checked his radio. Beep. The signal became stronger. Much stronger. He looked at the valley. Then at the radio. The source was somewhere down there. The northern route was finally within reach. But something else caught his attention. A line of footprints crossed the snow. They came from the direction of the mountain pass and continued toward the valley. Elias crouched. The tracks were fresh, very fresh. He followed them with his eyes. They disappeared behind a cluster of trees. Elias didn't follow immediately. He watched the valley first. The small settlement had a wooden fence. Only a few buildings. Smoke came from 2 chimneys. People were moving outside. No obvious signs of fighting. It looked peaceful. But after the hunters, Elias trusted appearances less than ever. He found a sheltered position beneath a rock ledge. From there, he could observe the valley without being seen. He took out his binoculars. The settlement seemed normal. Someone was chopping wood. Another person carried water. 2 people worked on a small greenhouse. There were maybe 15 people. Possibly fewer. Compared with the larger settlement. This place felt different. Smaller. Quieter. More isolated. Elias watched for an hour. No weapons were openly visible. No guards stood on the walls. But there were warning signs. Several bells had been placed around the perimeter. Trip alarms. Simple but effective. If zombies approached, the bells would alert everyone. Elias nodded. Someone here understood survival. He checked the signal again. Beep. The strongest it had ever been. Elias looked at the settlement. Could the transmitter be there? Possibly. Then the radio crackled. A voice came through. Not Station 7. A different voice. Weak. Faint. Anyone on the mountain? Elias froze. The transmission continued. If you can hear this. Static. Do not enter the valley after dark. Elias looked at the sky. The sun was already disappearing. The voice continued. Wait until morning. Then the transmission ended. Elias looked at the settlement again. The people were still moving. Smoke continued rising. Lights began appearing inside the buildings. It looked warm, safe, inviting. But someone had just told him not to enter. He didn't argue with warnings anymore. Elias made camp beneath the rock ledge. He didn't light a fire. Instead, he ate a cold meal. He wrapped himself in his blanket and watched the valley. The settlement slowly became quiet. One light after another disappeared. Then, a single light appeared at the edge of the valley. Moving. A flashlight. Someone was walking outside the settlement. Elias raised his binoculars. The person stopped, looked toward the mountain, toward him. Elias lowered the binoculars. His heart raced. Could they see him? He couldn't know. The person turned away, then continued walking. Elias remained hidden. He checked his journal. Day 150. Reached the mountain pass. Found a deliberate barricade. Took the eastern trail instead. Nearly slipped from the mountain. Reached the northern valley. Found a small survivor settlement. Signal is extremely strong. Received a warning. Do not enter the valley after dark. He paused. Then wrote. I'm waiting until morning. Elias looked toward the valley one last time. The small settlement seemed peaceful beneath the mountains. But he had learned that peace could be temporary. Tomorrow, he would approach, carefully, from a distance, and if the people there were safe, perhaps he would finally speak to another survivor face to face. But tonight, he stayed outside the valley. Watching, waiting, surviving. Chapter 18, The Valley Settlement. Elias waited until sunrise. He had barely slept. The small settlement below the mountain remained quiet throughout the night, except for the occasional movement of a guard along the fence. The warning from the radio still bothered him. Do not enter the valley after dark. Now the sun was rising. It was morning. Elias packed his things. Before leaving his hiding place, he checked the settlement one final time through his binoculars. People were already awake. Smoke rose from the chimneys. Someone opened the main gate. 2 people left carrying backpacks. Another person began clearing snow from the road. Everything looked normal. Elias wasn't convinced, but he needed water. His supplies were running low. And the settlement might have information about the northern route. He decided to approach, carefully. Elias descended the mountain trail. He kept his hands visible. His crowbar remained attached to his backpack instead of being held. He didn't want to look threatening. The settlement became larger as he approached. A wooden fence surrounded the main buildings. Several bells were attached to wires around the perimeter. Trip alarms. Elias recognized the system immediately. It was simple, but effective. A person appeared on the nearest watch platform. They pointed a rifle toward him. Elias stopped. The person shouted, "Stop." Elias raised both hands. "I'm not infected." The guard didn't lower the rifle. "Stay where you are." Elias nodded. "I'm alone." Another guard appeared. Then a third. They watched him carefully. One of them walked toward the gate. He was older than Elias. Gray hair, heavy winter coat, a rifle hanging across his chest. He stopped several meters away. "Name." Elias hesitated. Station 7's warning returned to him. "Don't give your real name." He answered carefully. "Elias." The man studied him. "Where did you come from?" "South." "How long?" "Long enough." The man frowned. "That's not an answer. It's the only one I'm giving." For several seconds, neither spoke. Then the older man smiled slightly. "Smart." The gate remained closed. The man asked another question. "Are you alone?" "Yes." "Anyone following you?" Elias thought of the hunters. "Maybe." The man's expression changed. "Maybe. I was followed." "By whom?" "I don't know." The man exchanged a look with the guards. Then turned toward the gate. "Open it." The guards hesitated. The older man repeated himself. "Open it." The gate slowly moved. Elias entered. The settlement was smaller than it had appeared. From the mountain, about 15 people, several wooden cabins, a communal building, a workshop, a greenhouse, a water station, a small storage building, and a medical room. It wasn't luxurious, but it was alive. People were working. Children were nowhere to be seen. Elias noticed that immediately. He didn't ask. "Not yet." The older man introduced himself. "Name's Daniel." He pointed toward the main building. "You can warm up there." Elias nodded. "Thank you." Daniel looked at his backpack. "You carrying food?" "Some. Water?" "Some." "We're not taking anything." Elias looked at him. Daniel shrugged. "You'd be surprised how many people think entering a settlement means surrendering their belongings." "I don't." "Good." Inside the communal building, warmth surrounded Elias. A stove burned in the center. Several tables filled the room. People were eating breakfast. Conversation stopped when Elias entered. Every eye turned toward him. Elias wasn't comfortable. He had spent months alone. Being watched by 15 people felt worse than being surrounded by zombies. He sat near the wall. A woman placed a bowl of soup in front of him. "You look exhausted." Elias looked at the soup. "How much?" She frowned. "Free." He stared at her. She laughed softly. "Eat." Elias slowly picked up the spoon. The soup was simple. Potatoes, carrots, a little meat. But it was hot. Elias ate slowly. He didn't realize how hungry he was until the bowl was almost empty. The woman returned. "More." Elias hesitated. "Yes." She smiled. "Good." Daniel sat across from him. "You've been traveling alone for a while." Elias nodded. "How long?" "Months." "Where have you stayed?" "Different places." "Bunker." Elias's spoon stopped. Daniel noticed. "You mentioned the bunker." "No. You didn't have to." Elias became alert. Daniel leaned back. "Your backpack has a Hart family marker." Elias looked down. The tree symbol was stitched into one of the straps. He had forgotten about it. Daniel continued. "Your family built shelters in these mountains." Elias stared at him. "You know my family." "Not personally." "Then how?" Daniel looked toward the window. "Your family helped people before the apocalypse." Elias said nothing. "Long before this happened, they prepared emergency shelters throughout the region." Daniel paused. "Some of us knew about them." Elias's mind raced. The safe houses weren't as secret as he had thought. But Daniel's settlement didn't seem interested in stealing them. That was something. What happened to the other shelters? Daniel's expression became serious. "Some were emptied." "Why?" "People found them." "The hunters." Daniel looked at him. "So you've met them?" Elias nodded. "They're not the only ones." Daniel explained that several groups had discovered parts of the old shelter network. Some were peaceful. Others weren't. The larger settlements often fought over resources. Some groups searched for underground shelters specifically. They know those places contain food, medicine, generators. Daniel looked directly at Elias. "If you know the location of more shelters." "I don't." It was partly true. Elias wasn't going to reveal anything. Daniel seemed satisfied. "Good." After breakfast, Elias asked about the northern route. Daniel brought him to a large map. The map covered an entire wall. Mountains, roads, rivers, settlements, old military routes. Several areas were marked in red. Daniel pointed toward the north. This is where most people stop. Why? Because the road beyond here is dangerous. Zombies. Not primarily. Elias understood. People. Daniel pointed farther north. There are several abandoned towns. Then farther. Then a military research station. Elias's attention sharpened. Research station. Abandoned. Completely. Daniel hesitated. We don't know. Elias remembered Station 7. The factory beacon. The hidden network. The warning about compromised relays. Something was happening farther north. Where does the radio signal go? Elias asked. Daniel looked at him. What signal? Elias didn't answer immediately. Then he pulled out his radio. Station 7. Several people in the room looked up. Daniel's expression changed. You've heard them? Yes. How long? Since the railway. Daniel walked closer. Did they give you directions? Sometimes. Did they mention the Northern Valley? No. Daniel stared at the radio. Then quietly said, That's strange. Elias asked why. Daniel explained that the settlement had once received Station 7 broadcasts regularly. But the transmissions had become less frequent. Then stopped entirely. Except for occasional automated signals. The factory beacon was one of those. Elias nodded. I found it. Daniel's face hardened. You went there? Yes. Then you were lucky. Why? Because people are using it now. Elias already knew. Who? We don't know. Daniel pointed to another section of the map. They've been moving north. How many? Unknown. Armed. Yes. Elias immediately thought of the hunters. Could they be the same group? Maybe. Daniel studied him. How did you escape? Someone helped me. The Watcher. Elias froze. Daniel noticed. You've seen them. Elias nodded slowly. Daniel sighed. Then you're farther into this than I thought. The Watcher wasn't a member of the settlement. Daniel said they had appeared several times over the past few months. Never stayed. Never gave a name. They occasionally left supplies. Warned people about danger. Then disappeared. No one knows who they are. No. Elias thought about the dark coat. The food. The water. The rescue. Maybe they're just trying to help. Daniel smiled faintly. Maybe. Elias spent the afternoon inside the settlement. He repaired his boots. Refilled his water. Traded a small amount of dried meat for several batteries. He also bought a new pair of gloves using an old lighter he no longer needed. For the first time in months, he experienced something close to normal life. Trading, eating, repairing things, listening to people talk. It felt strange, but good. Near sunset, Elias visited the greenhouse. Several plants were growing beneath lamps. Tomatoes, potatoes, leafy vegetables, a few herbs. One man was carefully tending them. How do you keep them alive? Generators. What if the fuel runs out? The man shrugged. Then we figure something else out. Elias smiled. That answer felt familiar. Survival wasn't about having perfect plans. It was about adapting when plans failed. That evening, Daniel offered him a place to sleep. Elias accepted. But before bed, he went outside. The mountains were dark. Snow reflected the moonlight. The settlement was quiet. For once, he didn't need to sleep with one hand on his weapon. He could hear people breathing inside the cabins. Someone laughed. Someone coughed. Someone closed a door. Ordinary sounds. Human sounds. Elias looked toward the northern mountains. His brother had traveled beyond them. The path ahead remained dangerous. But now Elias had more information. More food. More water. A safer route. And people he could return to. He wasn't completely alone anymore. He opened his journal. Day 151. Entered the Northern Valley settlement. Met a man named Daniel. The settlement has around 15 people. They know about the Hart family shelters. They also know about the Watcher. Station 7 used to communicate with them. The northern route is dangerous. There may be an abandoned military research station farther north. Elias paused. Then wrote. For the first time in a long time, I ate with other people. It felt strange. I think I liked it. He closed the journal. Before going inside, Elias looked toward the mountains. Somewhere beyond them, his brother continued north. Elias had spent months surviving alone. Tonight, he finally understood that surviving didn't always mean staying alone. Sometimes, survival meant knowing when to accept a warm bowl of soup, when to trust a locked gate, when to listen, and when to keep moving. Tomorrow, Elias would decide how to continue north. Tonight, he would sleep somewhere safe. Chapter 19, The Northern Route. Elias woke before sunrise. For a few seconds, he didn't remember where he was. Then he heard voices outside. People moving through the settlement. Someone splitting wood. Someone starting the generator. A door opening. The ordinary sounds of people beginning another day. He sat up. The small room Daniel had given him was warm. His backpack rested beside the bed. His journal was underneath it. Elias smiled faintly. For once, he hadn't slept with his boots on. After breakfast, Elias met Daniel near the settlement's map room. Daniel was already studying the northern route. You really intend to leave today? Elias nodded. Yes. Daniel pointed toward the mountains. The weather should stay clear until tomorrow. That's enough. Maybe. Daniel looked at him. You're determined. I have someone I'm looking for. Your brother. Elias nodded. Daniel didn't ask anything else. Instead, he pulled a smaller map from a drawer. This is the route. Daniel spread the map across the table. A thin blue line crossed the mountains. It followed an old service road before disappearing into the wilderness. The main road is too exposed, Daniel explained. The hunters. Among other things. He pointed farther north. There are old maintenance trails here. Most are buried, but they can still be followed. Elias memorized the route. How far? If the weather stays clear. 3 days. Elias nodded. 4 if it doesn't. Daniel pointed to a small symbol. A triangle surrounded by a circle. What's this? An old emergency station. Another safe house. No. Daniel shook his head. It was built by the government before the outbreak. Elias looked closer. Is it occupied? We don't know. That answer had become familiar. We don't know. Elias marked it anyway. Daniel handed him a small paper map. Keep this. Elias hesitated. Why? Because the trail you're taking isn't on most maps anymore. Why give it to me? Daniel shrugged. You came here without stealing anything. Elias blinked. You helped our greenhouse. I watered some plants. You fixed the pump. It was already almost fixed. Daniel smiled. And you didn't ask for anything before helping. Elias looked down at the map. Thank you. Before leaving, Elias visited the settlement's small workshop. His boots needed one final repair. An older woman reinforced the soles with pieces of rubber. You've been walking a lot. Too much. She laughed. That's what happens when you don't have a car. Elias smiled. The conversation was strangely comforting. Simple. Normal. Something he hadn't experienced in a long time. He traded a small amount of dried food for several useful items. A roll of wire. 2 candles. A sewing kit. A small metal cup. Nothing expensive. Nothing that would burden his backpack. Everything had a purpose. Before leaving, Elias visited the greenhouse. The man tending the plants gave him several small potatoes. For the road. Elias looked at them. I can pay. No. Are you sure? The man nodded. Bring something back someday. Elias smiled. I will. He placed the potatoes carefully into his backpack. At the gate, Daniel waited. The settlement was awake now. Several people had gathered nearby. Not to say goodbye. Exactly. But to watch him leave. Elias felt strangely embarrassed. He wasn't used to people caring whether he returned. Daniel handed him a small cloth pouch. Water purification tablets. I already have some. Then now you have more. Elias accepted it. Thank you. Daniel looked toward the mountains. Don't follow the road after the second ridge. Why? There was movement there yesterday. Zombies. Daniel shook his head. People. Elias understood. The gate opened. Elias stepped outside. He turned back once. The settlement stood behind him. Smoke rising from chimneys. People moving between buildings. The greenhouse glowing faintly. For a moment, he wondered what it would feel like to stay. To have a community. To have people who knew him. To wake up every morning knowing where his next meal would come from. It was tempting. Very tempting. But his brother was still out there. And Elias wasn't ready to stop. He raised one hand. Daniel raised his in return. Then Elias turned toward the mountains. The gate closed behind him. The first part of the journey was easy. The trail followed a frozen river. Elias walked steadily. The weather remained clear. His radio stayed quiet. He checked it every few hours. Nothing. That was fine. He didn't need the signal every minute. He knew where he was going. Around midday, he discovered fresh tracks. Human. One person. The footprints crossed the river and continued north. Elias crouched. The tread pattern looked familiar. He compared it to the photographs he had taken earlier. Not the hunters. Not Daniel's people. Not the Watcher. Someone else. Perhaps his brother. Elias followed the tracks for several minutes. Then stopped. They were too old. At least several days. Still, someone had traveled this way. Later, he found another heart marker. This one had been carved into a tree. The symbol was nearly hidden beneath snow. Elias cleared it. Beneath the tree was a short message. 3 words. Keep moving north. Elias smiled. He knew who had written it. You're really leaving these everywhere. He photographed the marker. Then continued. The trail climbed. The second ridge was ahead. Elias remembered Daniel's warning. Don't follow the road after the second ridge. So he planned to leave the road before reaching it. He took the narrower mountain trail instead. It was slower, but safer. As the sun began setting, Elias reached the first ridge. From the top, he could see the road below. Several abandoned vehicles. A few collapsed buildings. Nothing unusual. He lowered his binoculars. Then noticed something. Movement. 3 people. They were walking along the road. Elias immediately crouched. Hunters. He couldn't tell. He watched them. They were carrying rifles. One stopped beside an abandoned vehicle. Another looked around. Then they continued north. Elias didn't approach. He waited until they disappeared. That evening, he camped beneath a group of trees. He didn't light a fire. Instead, he ate cold food and wrapped himself in his blanket. The settlement was already far behind him. The mountains ahead were dark. He checked the radio. Static. Then, beep. Elias looked up. The signal. Northwest. Weak. But there. Then a voice came through. Not Station 7. Not his brother. A new voice. Travelers on the northern route. Static. Elias leaned closer. If you are coming from the valley. The message broke. Then returned. Avoid Ridge 2. Elias looked toward the mountains. That was where he was heading. The transmission continued. Armed group has established a temporary camp. Static. Do not approach. The signal disappeared. Elias slowly lowered the radio. So Daniel's warning had been correct. Someone was occupying the ridge. Elias opened his journal. Day 152. Left the valley settlement. Daniel. Gave me a safer route north. Received food, water tablets, and supplies. Found another heart marker. Saw armed people near the second ridge. Station 7 warned about a temporary camp there. He paused. Then wrote. The northern route isn't empty. But neither am I. He smiled at his own words. Then looked toward the mountains. Elias studied the map again. There was another path around Ridge 2. It would add half a day. Maybe more. But it avoided the armed group. He didn't hesitate. He marked the detour. Better to lose half a day than risk losing everything. Before sleeping, Elias thought about the settlement. Daniel. The greenhouse. The warm soup. The people who had given him supplies without asking for anything in return. For months, Elias had believed that surviving alone was the only safe option. Now he knew that wasn't completely true. There were good people. There were dangerous people. And there were people like the Watcher whose intentions he still couldn't understand. The world wasn't divided into safe and dangerous. It was more complicated than that. Elias closed his journal. Tomorrow, he would take the longer route. Around Ridge 2. Then farther north. Toward the abandoned military research station. Toward the next shelter. Toward the trail his brother had left behind. He pulled his blanket tighter. The wind moved through the trees. Somewhere far away, a wolf howled. Elias closed his eyes. He wasn't home. Not yet. But for the first time, he knew there were places he could return to. Chapter 20. The Abandoned Station. Elias left the mountain trail before sunrise. The northern valley was already far behind him. He had spent the previous night beneath a group of pine trees, sleeping lightly and keeping his radio turned off. The warning about Ridge 2 had been clear. Avoid it. So he had taken the longer eastern trail. It added nearly half a day. But he was alive. That was what mattered. The eastern trail gradually descended. The mountains became less steep. The trees became thinner. And the snow-covered landscape opened into a wide valley. Elias checked his map. The abandoned military research station was somewhere ahead. He couldn't see it yet. But the radio signal was getting stronger. Beep. Elias stopped. He checked the receiver. Signal strength. 64%. He looked toward the north. Almost there. Around midday, he found an old road. Unlike the mountain trails, this road had been cleared at some point. Not recently, but enough that Elias could see the pavement beneath the snow. Vehicle tracks crossed it. Fresh. He crouched. 2 vehicles. Maybe 3. Heading north. Elias immediately became cautious. The station might not be abandoned. At least not completely. He followed the road from a distance. Several hundred meters ahead, he spotted a large fence. Tall, reinforced, partially buried in snow. A warning sign hung from the gate. Restricted area. Below it, Northridge Research Facility. Elias stopped. This was it, the abandoned military research station. He raised his binoculars. The facility was enormous. Several concrete buildings stood behind the fence. A communications tower rose above them. Large storage tanks were covered in snow. A helicopter sat abandoned on a landing pad. The main building still had electricity. Several windows were glowing faintly. Elias lowered the binoculars. Not abandoned. He moved away from the road. A large rocky hill gave him a good view of the facility. He spent nearly an hour observing. There were no obvious zombies. But there were signs of human activity. A vehicle moved between 2 buildings. Someone walked along the fence. Smoke rose from a chimney. The station was occupied. Elias checked his radio. The signal was extremely strong now. Beep, beep. Then a voice came through. Station 7. Elias leaned closer. To any survivor approaching Northridge. Static. Do not enter through the main gate. Elias looked toward the gate. The message continued. Repeat. Static. Do not enter through the main gate. Elias immediately marked the warning. Then the voice became quieter. If the station appears active. A pause. Assume it is. Elias stared at the facility. So Station 7 knew. They were monitoring it. The transmission continued. There is an old maintenance entrance on the western side. Elias checked his map. There was one. Buried beneath snow. Use it only if you have no alternative. Then, do not trust anyone claiming to represent Station 7. The transmission ended. Elias sat completely still. That last warning bothered him. Do not trust anyone claiming to represent Station 7. So someone inside the facility might pretend to be connected to them. He couldn't assume anyone was friendly. He would have to investigate from outside first. Elias moved around the western perimeter. The snow was deep, but the fence was partially collapsed in one section. Beyond it was a small concrete structure. The maintenance entrance. He cleared the snow. A steel door appeared. Locked. He tried the handle. Nothing. Then he noticed a keypad. Dead. He opened the panel. The wires were still intact. Elias remembered the tools he'd scavenged. He carefully connected 2 wires. The keypad flickered. Access denied. He tried again. Nothing. Then he noticed something scratched into the metal. The Hart family symbol. His heart skipped. Beneath the symbol were 3 numbers. 7, 3, 1. Elias remembered the safehouse system. 3 symbols. 3 stars. The family had access to places they weren't supposed to. He entered the numbers. 7, 3, 1. The keypad beeped. Access granted. The door unlocked. Elias stared at it. Of course. His family had been involved with this place too. He opened the door slowly. Cold air rushed through the tunnel. The maintenance corridor was dark. Elias turned on his flashlight. Concrete walls. Old pipes. Electrical cables. The corridor stretched deep beneath the facility. He entered. Then closed the door behind him. The tunnel was surprisingly clean. Someone had been using it. Fresh footprints appeared in the dust. Human. Several sets. Elias followed them carefully. The corridor eventually split. One path led toward the main buildings. Another led deeper underground. The map showed an underground laboratory. Elias stopped. Why would anyone maintain this facility? What had happened here? He chose the underground route. The deeper he went, the colder it became. Then he heard a sound. A generator. Still running. Elias followed the hum. He entered a large underground room. Machines filled the walls. Old computers. Power systems. Radio equipment. And several sealed metal doors. One door had a label. Archive. Elias stared. This wasn't simply a military base. It was a research facility. He searched the room. Most equipment was dead, but one computer remained active. The screen displayed a simple message. Emergency archive system. Elias approached. The system asked for a password. He had none. Then he noticed the family symbol beside the keyboard. A tree. He touched it. The screen changed. Hart family access detected. Elias froze. A password prompt appeared. Identify family member. He typed. Elias Hart. The system processed. Then displayed. Access level. Survivor. Elias stared. Survivor. The archive opened. Thousands of files appeared. Most were dated years before the apocalypse. Emergency planning. Shelter construction. Evacuation routes. Food storage. Disease response. Infrastructure failure. Natural disasters. Then he saw a folder marked Project Winterfall. Elias opened it. His expression changed. The project documents described an emergency survival network designed to preserve human populations during a catastrophic collapse. The Hart family had helped design portions of it. The hidden bunkers. The safehouses. The radio relays. Station 7. Everything was connected. Then Elias found something more recent. A file dated shortly after the apocalypse began. Winterfall status. He opened it. Primary network compromised. Several facilities lost. Station 7 remains operational. Northern Survivor Corridor established. Hart family members authorized to access emergency shelters. Elias's hands trembled. Then he saw another line. Known Hart survivor. 1. Status. Active. Current direction. North. Elias stared. Only one. His brother. Alive. A second file opened automatically. Family member. Hart. The name was partially corrupted. But the information remained. Status. Active. Last confirmed location. Northern Corridor. Destination. Unknown. Elias leaned back. His brother wasn't just surviving. He had been moving through the same network. Following the same route. Possibly helping other survivors along the way. Then another message appeared. Incoming transmission. Elias froze. The computer began receiving a signal. Station 7. If you've reached Northridge. Elias listened. You've found the archive. He looked around the room. The voice continued. Everything you need to understand the network is here. Static. But your brother isn't. Elias's heart sank. The voice continued. He left Northridge 3 days ago. Elias stared at the screen. 3 days. He had just missed him. Station 7 transmitted the final message. He continued north. A map appeared. One route. Far beyond the mountains. Far beyond the northern settlements. The line ended at a location marked Winterfall Command. Elias whispered the name. Winterfall. Then the transmission ended. Elias remained inside the archive room for a long time. His brother had been here. 3 days ago. He had been so close. But the trail wasn't over. Not even close. Elias copied the map, saved the coordinates, collected every piece of information he could carry. Then shut down the archive. Before leaving, he looked back at the screen. The words remained. Known Hart survivor. Active. Elias smiled. At least he knew. His brother was alive. He returned through the maintenance tunnel. Before leaving the facility, he checked the surroundings again. The station remained occupied. Whoever was living there still didn't know he had entered. Elias wasn't going to tell them. Not yet. He slipped back through the western entrance. Then covered the door with snow. He walked several hundred meters away before turning on the radio. The signal was weak again. But still there. North. Not northwest anymore. North. Elias checked the new map. The route ahead would take him farther into the frozen wilderness. Beyond the mountains. Beyond the settlements. Beyond the familiar shelter network. His brother was heading somewhere called Winterfall Command. Elias tightened his backpack. He opened his journal. Day 153. Reached the Northridge Research Facility. It wasn't abandoned. Found a hidden maintenance entrance. The Hart family had access to the facility. Discovered the Winterfall Emergency Network. Confirmed Station 7 is part of that network. Most importantly, Elias paused. His hand trembled slightly. Then he wrote, "My brother is alive. He was here 3 days ago." He continued north. His destination is Winterfall Command. He stared at the words. Then added, "I'm coming, big brother. But I'm not rushing. I'll survive first. Then I'll find you." Elias closed the journal. The sun was disappearing beyond the mountains. Snow began falling again. He adjusted his coat. The northern wilderness waited ahead. He had started this journey searching for a missing brother. Now he knew the truth. His brother was alive. He had left a trail. And Elias was finally close enough to follow it. But the world beyond the mountains was colder. More dangerous. And whatever Winterfall command was, it would change everything. Elias turned north. Then started walking. End of Volume 2. Thank you for listening to II Fiction Stories. Please like, comment, share and subscribe. See you next time.